Hey guys, tonight we step out beneath a lantern sky, where the last orange thread of daylight knots itself to the stone of a town gate, and the street ahead relaxes into a ribbon of brown gloss. You feel the wood of the pilgrim staff warm under your palm, hear your breath sounding easy, and taste that damp, metallic hint in the air that promises rain again. The mud in front of you is already thinking about your shoes. You're thinking about not falling on your dignity. Somewhere a bell rolls once, twice, a reminder that the watch will soon make its rounds and that the night has its habits. You have yours. Walk, watch, and mind the splash. You probably won't survive this if by this we mean stepping into a pothole the size of a baptismal font while trying to look wise and historical at the same time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love imagining this path stretching through your cities and bedrooms in real time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand just inside the gate, where thick timbers banded with iron still hold the day at the hinge. Medieval towns often closed these gates at night to keep the peace and keep out trouble. Curfews were a kind of civic lullaby, and watchmen enforced them with stubborn patience and a healthy suspicion of anyone moving quickly. You, however, move slowly, because you are cultivating the noble art of not splashing your neighbor. Mud etiquette. Lesson 1. You take the crown of the road if you must, but you do not steal it. You glance behind, nod to the woman with the wicker creel, and gesture for her to step onto the driest ridge first. Your reward is not sainthood, it's simply not getting a glare that could dent a helmet. Your lantern is a little miracle of its own horn panes thinned to translucence, a candle's pearly tongue fenced against the breeze. The light isn't strong, but it's polite. It doesn't overpower the stars. You angle it down to read the texture underfoot. Dry crumb means safe. Slick mirror means betrayal. Rutted clay with standing puddles means you proceed with knees soft, pride looser, and arms ready to windmill in a way you absolutely will deny later. Joke 1. Call this your medieval flashlight with a 0% battery and a very optimistic user. You cross the threshold, and the town falls behind, with its stable breath of baking, tallow, and wet straw. Night gathers the road. That's when the rules of passing matter. You hear the clop of a mule and press to the margin, not into the ditch. You're not auditioning for a mud angel, but just enough that the muleteer sees your lantern and your friendly palm. You say, "God give you a good road," and you mean it. He leans from his saddle and says something about the ford near St. Agnes being high, and you file that away for later like you're saving a tab in your mind. When you step back to the crown, you do it with the grace of a court dancer who has trained exclusively in puddle avoidance. A mainstream fact eases in with your footsteps. Countless medieval towns rang curfew at dusk or 9 o'clock, and the gates were shut or narrowed. Travellers were advised to arrive early or leave early to avoid being caught outside. You're doing the in-between version, leaving as the light melts, because sometimes the day job holds you, or the hostel was crowded, or your feet wanted 10 more minutes before negotiating with the mud. Historians still argue whether pilgrims generally preferred pre-dawn starts to maximize cool hours, or whether evening departures were common on routes with frequent hospices. You settle the disagreement for yourself in the quietest way possible. You walk, and then you keep walking. Mud etiquette. Lesson 2. The splash angle. You plant your heel with caution and roll through so your toe flicks water forward, not sideways. The sideways splash is a social felony. The forward flick is a polite fiction. The puddle is blamed, you are absolved, and everyone keeps their tempers. If someone behind you insists on marching like they're stomping grapes for a vintage you'll never afford, you let them pass and admire the modernity of their confidence. Joke 2. If they were any splashier, they'd need to sell tickets and call it a fountain. A quirky tidbit drifts up with the mist. Some travellers swore by rubbing a bit of goose fat on the edges of their shoe leather to keep wet from soaking in, less a waterproofing miracle than a small olive branch offered to the weather. You oblige, not because you expect bone-dry toes, but because rituals make the road feel like a conversation. You've already learned the trick of tucking your hem with a spare thong so your cloak doesn't become a mop. Somewhere, a poet improves your look in the telling. Here, you settle for competent. You pass a wayside cross that looks like it grew from the stone itself. You bow your head without breaking stride. The field beyond belongs to someone's winter dreams. The furrows hold puddles like mercury mirrors, each briefly catching the lantern, each failing to swallow the sky. You hear the laugh of boys behind you, apprentices, probably testing curfew and their master's patience. You smile and step to one side, remembering how rules feel at 15, like a game invented specifically to be outclimbed. The path narrows between hedges, and the mud deepens to a moral question. Mud etiquette. Lesson 3. When the lane becomes a single line of survivable footing, you use short, quiet phrases after you. Thank you, there you are, and you mean them. You do not sprint the balance beam and then break suddenly out of panic. You keep your rhythm, your lantern low, and your breath steady. Your staff taps the center as though reading Braille. The hedge takes a breath of your cloak edge and lets it go. Another practical rule. Mind the invisible. Night dampens sound, but somewhere a cart waits, and somewhere else a sleepy dog holds a grudge against the entire profession of walking. The sleepier the hour, the more brilliantly the dog argues its case. You keep your steps uninteresting, your silhouette small. Joke 3. If the dog demands your papers, you'll show it your very legal permit to keep existing. You test the depth of a puddle with the tip of your staff and catch the quiver that says deeper than expected. You detour. This is the slow arithmetic of the road. 2 steps added here to avoid 10 added there, wringing your hem. You remember your promise to yourself at the gate. Don't splash the Creole woman. Don't step on a song. Don't race the mule. Don't fight the mud. It beats everyone eventually. Your job is to lose gracefully and keep your socks serviceable. A final fact for the mile. Many lanterns used horn-thin slices from cattle horns because glass was costly and fragile. The horn diffused the flame into a kinder, smokeless glow that didn't blind you to the night. Your own flame hums, a bee in a small hive. The gate's bell gives one last roll, and the town's mouth closes behind you. You don't look back. You look where the road climbs like a promise you'll cash in, one muddy coin at a time. Ahead, the trees lean, a black soft corridor. You take the crown again, but you gesture to the Creole woman first. She steps up, smiles in that way that says blessings and relief at once, and together you place your feet where the night permits, where the puddles lift their little stars, and the mud agrees. For now, to be only a chore, not a sentence. You travel by courtesy as much as by light. The etiquette is simple. Take turns with the high ground, keep the splash in front of you, and let the road remember your patience more than your footprints. You pause where the lane levels and inventory your little travelling civilization. Staff in your right hand, scrip hanging from your shoulder, shell bumping lightly against your chest, shoes negotiating a truce with the mud. The lantern's horn panes have fogged a touch from your breath, and you wipe them with the corner of your cloak, the way you might clear a phone screen if your phone were a candle and your subscription plan were hope. The road is a patient tutor. Tonight's lesson is gear. You didn't join this procession empty-handed. You came with all the small decisions that turn walking into pilgrimage. First, the scallop shell. It's not just decoration, it's declaration. The ribbed fan sits where your cloak clasp might go, or tied to your hat band, its radiating grooves catching the lantern light like a quiet halo that forgot to be metaphysical and just went practical. Mainstream fact time. The scallop has long been the emblem of the Camino to Santiago de Compostela, symbolizing both St. James and the way many paths gather into one. That geometry comforts you. Every little lane, each muddy ridge, each cautious ford, everything you do angles toward a single center, shell-like. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims typically received an official shell only upon reaching Santiago, or whether many bought them along the way, or even at home, and wore them as travel permits of sorts. You touch yours and admit the obvious. Some stalls sell purpose more quickly than shrines do. Purpose aside, the shell earns its keep. You use it to scoop water from a barrel without thrusting your whole hand into a stranger's supply, to ladle thin pottage into your trencher when the hostel lad forgets your bowl, to measure charity in a way that feels honest, one shell of grain to the hungry child, one shell of salt traded for a handful of news. Quirky tidbit. There's a folk belief along parts of the coast that if you tap your shell gently against a fountain's stone lip 3 times, the water's temper will change and refuse to upset a traveller's stomach. You test it anyway, because why not be on friendly terms with your beverages? Your staff board on if you're feeling fancy is the longest sentence you carry. It speaks for you at fords, keeps rhythm on climbs, and negotiates with dogs, not by violence but by clarity. I am large, I am here. I am not interesting to bite. You favour an ash pole with a little iron ferrule on the tip where it meets the earth. There's debate about the hardware. Historians still argue whether iron tips were widespread, or if most staffs were simply whittled, smooth and hardened by use. You notice the difference when you probe the depth of a puddle. Iron gives a sharper answer. Wood is a philosopher. Joke 1. Your staff is basically a medieval hiking stick with a customer support line. You tap the ground and it answers. Your wait time is approximately one small splash. Some staffs wear a crosspiece near the top like a T, giving your hands a choice of positions and your shoulders mercy on long descents. You loop a thong from the handle to your wrist when the lane turns tricky, because a lost staff is a story you don't want to tell. An old woman at the last village blessed it with a thumbprint of ash and a whisper. "For balance," she said. And you know she meant more than ankles. The scrip, the bag of bags, the original tote, the pocket you bring when you don't have pockets rests against your ribs with a clink of pewter badge and a hush of cloth on cloth. It holds the tiny world you don't want to show the weather. A waxed twist of salt, a coil of thread and 2 needles, a flint and steel that have become your favourite conversation, a folded scrap of parchment with names to remember at shrines, and a half heel of bread currently pretending to be immortal. You keep your safe conduct tucked in there too. The sealed letter that says you are who you say you are, and not a vagabond rehearsing piety for free soup. Joke 2. The scrip is your medieval carry-on. And yes, the gate agent, also known as the hostel doorkeeper, will absolutely make you fit it through an imaginary wooden rectangle with a withering stare. You've pinned a couple of pewter badges to the script's flap light, soft metal stamped with sacred images, proof you've stopped and listened in places that matter to other feet. If you pass through certain market towns, you'll see them stacked like moons on strings, each badge cheaper than the last the farther you are from the shrine it claims to represent. There's always a boy offering relic splinters from the true cross, in quantities that would reforest Judea. You've learned the calm trick of letting the seller talk until the story trips over itself. Mainstream fact aside, mass-produced pilgrim badges were common across Europe, sold as souvenirs and proofs of passage. Some even double as handy seals for letters when pressed into warm wax. You have one from a riverside chapel that, when warmed, leaves a tiny angel with suspiciously muscular arms. Shoes now. This is where comfort masquerades as theology. You wear turn shoes, soft leather, stitched inside out, and then turned. Supple enough to understand the road's moods, and thick enough to keep those moods from becoming lawsuits filed by your heels. You lace them snug, and treat them with a smear of tallow when you remember. Some walkers slip Patton's wooden overshoes underfoot in towns to keep wet from becoming a second baptism. In mud lanes, Patton's a comedy. You tried them once, and auditioned for a travelling slapstick troupe by accident. Historians still argue whether many medieval pilgrims went barefoot deliberately, as an act of penance, or only when poverty pinned the choice to them. You're not ashamed to admit your piety is compatible with covered toes. Joke 3. Your shoes have unionised and drafted a list of demands. Item 1 is roads not made of pudding. You practice lacing patterns to relieve pressure where a blister whispers soon. You keep a scrap of soft wool in the scrip, a little cloud you can park between skin and leather when the first hot spot complains. Quirky tidbit 2 for 1. Some walkers swear by bathing their feet in sage tea at day's end to teach the heat to leave, while others rub the soles with fresh garlic to frighten away rot and demons, which is at least effective against friends who dislike garlic. The shell bumps again, and you tap it thoughtfully. On some routes, people believe the shell is also a passport to generosity. Present it at a farmhouse door, and you'll be given a ladle of milk or a crust, not because the house has abundance, but because the house belongs to the same long road. Mainstream fact returns with a blink. Confraternities lay brotherhoods often kept lists or rules for how to treat pilgrims, with expectations for offering water, straw, or guidance within their means. You felt that modest law at work. A bucket pulled from a well just for you. A hand indicating which path avoids the flooded ford. A reminder not to cross the Lord's deer park without permission unless you want to meet the forester and his opinion. The market shell question rises again like a little wave. You bought yours in a stall 2 towns back, the vendor promising it had touched Galician wind, and then clarifying that the wind had been imported. You smiled and paid anyway because the truth is more complicated than stalls or shrines. The emblem says your feet intend a story. It doesn't claim you've finished the book. Historians still argue whether any authority policed shells on the road in a meaningful way. You suspect the road itself polices you best. Blisters are honest officers. As you walk, you rehearse the quiet rituals that keep gear from becoming grief. Before entering a hostel, you slip your staff under the bunk frame, where your fingers can find it in the dark without announcing your search with thumps. You tuck your shoes together toe to heel so you can slide into them at a bell's sudden summons. You rest the script beneath your cloak, but tie one strap to a belt loop because you respect both human nature and the midnight migration of bags toward elsewhere. You hang the shell where it can dry, because a wet badge limps in the morning. The lane broadens. The crown is yours for a breath, and you share it with the memory of the Creole woman, her smile like a lit window when all the other windows are thinking about sleep. Your staff clicks 3 times learned habit near stones that often shift, and you can feel in your hand the way the ferrule writes tiny letters to the ground. Here, it says, still here. The shell feels lighter when you remember its real job. Not to prove virtue, but to remind you that roads aim somewhere. The script thumps like a spare heartbeat. The shoes sign their truce with the mud again. And you, lantern bearer, mud diplomat, badge wearer, keep the etiquette simple. Let your gear be useful before it is impressive. Let your symbols do humble work, and let your steps tell a long, quiet truth that no market stall can counterfeit. You walk until the road forgets it's a road and remembers. It used to be a thought, 2 ruts, a brown ribbon, a hedge that leans in like an usher. When the path grows uncertain, you lift your lantern and start reading. Waymarks are the alphabet of the journey. You sound them out, a cairn where hands have spelled hope 1 stone at a time, a cross carved into a gatepost, a shrine with a painted eyelid half closed by weather. Your staff learns a new duty pointer, teacher, gentle gavel knocking on sense when the lane forks like a question. At the first choice, you find a low stack of stones, each one round as a shoulder. Cairns multiply where the landscape loses nerve. You add a pebble not because the pile needs it, but because you need to be the person who leaves a clue. A quirky tidbit rides in with the fog. Some walkers put their stone on the windward side, so the cairn tells a hidden story of storms. The pile becomes a weather diary if you know how to read it. You don't, but you pretend, because pretending counts as optimism. Joke 1. You declare yourself Vice President of Rocks and approve this cairn with your pebble signature. The next letter in the road sentence is a wayside cross. Not tall, not showy, just enough to snag the eye. A groove at its base holds rainwater, and the lantern makes a shy coin of light in it. Mainstream fact whispers in your ear. Throughout medieval Europe, stone crosses and chapels functioned as waymarks and spiritual rest stops, often placed at crossroads or boundaries to guide travellers and remind them to ask someone wiser than the mud for help. You touch the stone and feel it cool as a polite refusal. The cross does not decide for you. It invites you to decide better. Farther on, a milestone round, mossed, slouching toward the ditch, as if it has heard better stories than yours. Roman hands set such pillars along highways, the old Miliaria, telling distances to cities whose names arrive like trumpets. Historians still argue whether medieval travellers routinely understood the numbers on surviving Roman markers or simply treated them as friendly, ancient furniture. You understand enough. The pillar means you are still on a road that once believed in straight lines and public budgets. You pat it the way you might greet an elder at a family gathering. Thanks for getting everyone here before you. Polite passing begins as the path narrows between a thorny hedge and a little drop where water thinks about becoming a stream. You hear the suede hush of sandals and then the soft sea of cloth. Monks, 2 of them, walking with the gaze of men who've memorized horizon shapes. You step to the crown, then off it, palms visible, lantern low. You say, "Peace on your road," and they answer, "And on yours," matching your smile with one that seems to have practiced all morning. The etiquette is choreography, not duel. You angle your staff away from their sleeves. They gather their robes, so the hem doesn't mop your boots. And everyone pretends it was effortless. Joke 2. For 5 seconds, you all become synchronized swimmers. Except no one drowns, and the costumes are better. Here comes a mule with a wicker pannier the size of your last good decision. Mule etiquette is brisk and clear. You speak before you are spoken to, because silence around a hoof is an invitation to slapstick. "Good beast, wide road," you murmur, letting the animal hear your shape in your voice. The mule flares a nostril, pretends not to be flattered, and shifts enough that you can pass with both ankles still on their original paperwork. The muleteer lifts a palm in thanks. You lift yours in reply. Both gestures mean, We recognize each other's continued existence as desirable. Reasoning. Your eye learns to catch smaller signs. A notch cut into a fence post. A hawthorn twig bent and tucked trailer's code in miniature. 3 pebbles set in a line on a stile, pointing where the boots went. Once you spot the pattern, you see it everywhere, as if the countryside has decided to write in a whisper. You start placing your own little commas and periods when the path frays 2 sticks crossed on the wrong turning, a short stick leaning toward the safe one. The road is a group project graded on generosity. Painted marks appear too. A faint dab of white on a stone. A faded arrow on a barn plank where the path slips behind it. You know the famous yellow arrows on the Camino are largely modern, but chalk and paint were not medieval strangers. Parish wardens and confraternities sometimes marked approaches to shrines, fairs, or bridges with limewash or symbols recognizable to locals. Historians still argue whether such painted arrows were systematic or mostly ad hoc, the work of careful neighbors rather than any grand committee. You don't need minutes from a meeting. You only need the next smudge telling you not to blunder into a marsh just to prove you're brave. At a fork bordered by wild parsley and the disapproving cluck of a hen, you practice the phrases that keep traffic human. I'll wait. After you. 2 more behind. You deploy them like charms. There's a little shrine niche with a margin note scratched beside it, possibly by a bored mason. A tiny shoe with wings. You grin. Someone else had jokes too. You leave a quick prayer for the people whose handwriting you keep following. Where the hedge breaks, a wide view opens and, with it, the temptation to take the direct, shiny track slicing across the slope. You resist. The high track looks efficient and is almost certainly a watercourse in disguise, slick as sin and twice as persuasive. You choose the older, contouring line that meanders like a gossip, but gets you there with your dignity unsprained. Mainstream fact taps again. Medieval paths often shifted seasonally, with ridgeway routes favored in wet months and valley tracks in dry. Travelers kept mental maps that flexed with weather. You are building that kind of map, one careful splash at a time. A bell somewhere thin, bright marks the hour for people who care about hours. You mark yours by landmarks. A Bridge Brotherhood's plaque nailed to a post, promising planks ahead. A rowan tree planted where a child once recovered from fever, now a local guidepost, because every mother points to it when giving directions. Quirky tidbit. Some hamlets weave little straw dolls and hang them at a turn to catch the wandering, a charm to keep travellers from overshooting their door. You pass one, its straw arms open as if hugging the horizon. You say thank you, because straw listens as well as stone. Sharing the crown returns as a test. Cart behind you, goats in front, and a crosswind trying to make your cloak a sail. You pivot, tuck, and let the goats pass, with the dignity of visiting ambassadors who have chosen chaos as a policy. You help the cartwheel avoid the rutted trap with the flat of your staff. The carter's nod contains exactly 1 syllable of gratitude and 3 of weather. Everyone keeps moving, which is all the apology anyone needs. You stop at a wooden fingerpost whose hand has long since lost its fingers. Only the post remains, tilting, moss claiming the joints. You circle it slowly, reading the ground instead. Trodden grass to the right, churn to the left. A thread of wool snagged on bark where someone brushed by. A scrap of hymn the hedges might still be humming. Your lantern makes a small authority of you. You decide and say your decision aloud, just to hear it. Right. The road agrees, relieved to have an accomplice. When the path finally widens again, you look back and see how all these marks, stone, paint, straw, hoof, compose a single, gentle grammar. You've been learning please and thank you in a language older than the gate bell. You take the crown one more time, not as conquest but as shared resource, and you keep it only until you see a shape coming toward you with that everlasting pannier and the patient air of a mule who knows the road by heart. Joke 3. You wonder if waymarks ever take a day off. Hang a sign that says, "Gone pilgrimaging, back after harvest." Until they do, you will add your pebbles and your chalk and your quiet words, and the road will read you as surely as you read it. You breathe, taste the wet clay patience of the next bend, and let your staff punctuate the sentence with its steady tap, dot, dot, go. The lane lifts you like a palm and sets you down at a low door under a lantern, the shape of a patient hive. A board hangs beside it with letters that have been washed and repainted enough times to look like they're remembering themselves. Hospice of St. Giles, water for the poor, straw for the weary. You know the choreography, The road taught you. You knock with the wooden side of your staff, never the ferrule, because you are not auditioning for blacksmith. The doorkeeper porter, if you want the proper word, slides the hatch and gives you the look of a person who can recognize trouble while half asleep and bless a stranger without losing his place in a psalm. Peace, you say. He sees the shell, the scrip, the steady way you balance mud and dignity, and he nods you inside. The hinge complains. The smell is a recipe in layers, smoke that has told too many stories, wool that has dried and dampened and dried again, broth making honest promises nearby. Quirky tidbit. Some porters kept a short stick marked by hand widths to measure how wet you are before admitting you fully 2 hands. You may drip on the stone. 4 hands. You may remove the world from your cloak first. He taps your sleeve at 2 hands, hums approval, and gestures left. The left is the basin. Hospitality begins with water. You angle your lantern into a niche and find a shallow stone bowl, fed by a trickle that never seems to stop, even when the year forgets its rivers. A little ladle, its handle carved like a fish, lives on a hook. You wash hands, then face, the way the rule would like it, rule of Saint Benedict. That is, with its straight-backed insistence that guests are Christ in disguise and ought to be welcomed as if the disguise works every time. Mainstream fact plants its feet. Monasteries and confraternities across medieval Europe ran hospices and almshouses along busy routes, offering water, straw, fire, and sometimes a meal to pilgrims and the poor. The porter was the first voice of that charity. The water runs cold and blunts the road's argument. You feel the story of the day slide away. Formality now. You offer your name, the town you last slept in, and your destination said modestly, not like an advertisement. Some houses keep a register, a quill napping in a pot of ink like a bird with a black tongue. Historians still argue whether such registers were common or rare, kept only at major hospices or scattered all along the quieter stretches. Tonight, there is no book, only the porter's memory and his talent for placing faces on maps. He taps the script flap where your safe conduct rests. Keep that with you, he says, as if you needed the reminder, and you nod, because redundancy is the pilgrim's favorite virtue after patience. He shows you the signs that matter. Palms open, he indicates the warm room, where a small fire rehearses being large, the quiet room, where lanterns snuff earlier and snores have tenure, the little bench under a thorn branch, nailed crookedly to the rafters, the hospital's charm against lightning. He explains with the sheepish smile of a person who knows charms and physics can share a roof without agreeing. Joke 1. He points to a basket labelled found items, and you swear you see 3 identical wooden spoons, which suggests someone has been losing and finding the same spoon since Lent. Etiquette at the door is the opposite of hurry. You tap your staff dry at the threshold, not on the hearthstones, where embers might dislike the conversation. You keep your voice under the level of a soft prayer, which is the hospital's default lullaby. You step wide of the sleeping bodies, arranged like sentences on the floor, straw pallets, some with sacking over them, one with a luxury of 2 layers like a blanket that had a good harvest. Lights out at the bell, the porter says. The bell itself hangs in the passage, a temperate observer of human hope. Here is a rule that saves arguments. When the bell speaks, flames dwindle, stories compress to whispers, and the room joins the night. Joke 2. The bell is the medieval equivalent of your phone's bedtime reminder, except you cannot tap ignore, and also the bell knows where you live. Before he leaves you to find a corner, he shows another custom, the foot-laving stool. Not every house has it, but this one keeps the tradition for the sick or the sorrowing. A brother or a lay volunteer kneels, pours warm water scented faintly with rosemary over a traveller's feet, and dries them with a cloth that remembers better days. You are not so bold tonight. Blisters have been negotiated with, not declared, but the sight of the stool is a balm you feel in your throat. If someone needs it, the room will make space. The porter reads your eyes and says, "After supper, if old martyr's toes agree," and you promise the road, you will not covet another person's footbath. You choose a straw pallet near a beam that looks like it has forgiven weight before. You do what you practiced. Staff slid under the pallet where your fingers can find it at a bell's surprise. Shoes toe to heel, and slightly apart so you can step into them by feel. Scrip under the cloak, but tethered by its strap to your belt. Not paranoia routine, the calmer cousin of fear. Around you the room arranges itself into a temporary village. There is a widow with a rosary that clicks like a soothing insect. A pair of bricklayers trading weather for wages under their breath. A boy asleep with his boots still halfway on because sleep ambushed him during negotiations. Rules of rest are mercies in a list you could embroider if you had thread to spare. You do not shake straw after the bell. Shaken straw makes noise enough to wake the dead and annoy the living. You do not monopolize the fire. You rotate your seat the way a wheel shares its rim. Warm on one side, promise on the other. You do not hang wet socks where they drip on someone's neck. You do not air politics unless asked by the kind of person who enjoys being wrong publicly. You keep your snoring to a respectful murmur, if at all possible, though your influence there is famously limited. A woman in a scalloped hat, somebody's aunt in all worlds, pats the bench and hands you a sprig of wormwood. For the bedfellows, she says, meaning the creatures that rent the smallest rooms. Quirky tidbit. Travellers sometimes tucked pungent herbs, wormwood, rue, tansy, into straw to discourage lice and fleas. Whether the herbs convinced insects or only the sleepers is another debate. But the smell makes you feel like you've done something clever. You crumble the sprig, stir the straw, and imagine tiny negotiations underway. Supper clinks in the neighbouring room. You hear the hostler bang a ladle against a pot and call gently, not as a drill sergeant, but as a bellhop. Those who need, come. You'll learn the bowl routine properly in its own hour. For now, your focus is the choreography of settling. The porter returns with a clay lamp, sets it on a little shelf, and shows you the quencher, a coin-sized lid on a chain. At the bell, he repeats. You nod in the universal dialect of people who hope they'll be asleep before instructions become relevant. Historians still argue whether hospices consistently separated men and women in all regions, or improvised according to space, season, and local custom. Tonight, the room has its practical partitions. Families cluster, single travellers gravitate toward corners, and a curtain across the far alcove suggests a compromise between privacy and firelight. You keep your gaze generous and your feet cautious. The bell gives a test note. The room answers by lowering itself half an octave. You feel the day's mud dry into a memory, less a stain than a story the straw will retell to nobody. Joke 3. You consider leaving a carved 5-star review on the lintel. Excellent straw. Bell has kind voice. Porter measures wetness with integrity. But your knife is for apples and emergencies, and sleep is impatient. Before the bell truly speaks, the porter leads a soft grace. Not a performance, more a reminder that daylight is a long, fidgety guest, and darkness deserves its share of manners. You join without words, because the road has already taught you the language. Breathe in, let the shoulders settle. Think of the basin, the wormwood, the patient bell. The lamp flame narrows. Your shell, finally dry, nudges your chest like a confident worrystone. Your staff, hidden beneath you, hums its little iron vowel against the floor. Here. Lights out comes like a hand smoothing a page. The bell counts 3. The quencher touches the wick with the gravity of a closing eyelid, and the room becomes a soft geography of breaths. You listen for the inevitable, because some rules you write in ink. There will be one heroic snorer, one sleep talker bargaining with a cow, one child dreaming of running, and one dog outside arguing with philosophy. You smile in the dark, and the dark smiles back with the kind of patience that makes morning believable. Rules of rest hold. You keep them because they keep you. You let the hostel be your small country for a night, with a porter for a frontier, and a basin for a river, and a bell for a parliament that only meets once. You drift, not from boredom but from relief, the way a traveller accepts the civility of straw, the justice of water, and the amnesty of sleep. Night arranges itself into rows of breath. You lie on your straw island and learn the currents. Snoring, it turns out, has species. There's the puffing bellows 2 pallets over, the intermittent thunderclap near the door, and the small, apologetic hum from the widow with the clicking rosary like a kitten purring into a wool mitten. You place each in a mental map, not to complain but to navigate. Joke 1. You silently award medals gold to the bellows, silver to the thunderclap, and a lifetime achievement award to the kitten, who snores with impeccable manners. Dorm choreography begins before sleep, with bed assignment politics practiced at the speed of a slowly cooling stew. You chose a spot by a beam because beams keep secrets, and because a corner grants the illusion of walls. Others choose by fire distance, by draft avoidance, by proximity to the door for those who answer the call of dawn like a trumpet. Etiquette is quiet and practiced. You don't step across someone's bedding. You don't sit on another's pallet even to tie your laces. You fold your cloak in a square that looks smaller than it is, as if you're politely shrinking. Privacy isn't a room. Privacy is 2 hands of space, and everyone's will to pretend they cannot see you within it. Blanket rights become the evening's unspoken treaty. The hospice provides a rough cover woven wool with a career in patience, and you add your cloak if the night sharpens. You learn the trick of the diagonal fold, corner over shoulder, edge tucked under hip, an origami of warmth that doesn't migrate onto your neighbor. Someone near the wall negotiates a second blanket with the porter on the grounds that her cough is conducting a winter orchestra. Nobody disputes. Mainstream fact: communal sleeping arrangements were standard in many medieval hospices and almshouses, with straw bedding and shared coverings the norm. The rule of Saint Benedict and later statutes emphasized care for travelers, but resources were finite, and warmth was a collective puzzle. You become a small, kind piece of that puzzle by not monopolizing the fire's attention. Lice, the oldest patrons of hospitality, audition for membership. The wormwood you tucked into your straw announces itself with a bitter green sigh. You commit to comportment. Linen, if you have it, touches skin. Wool faces the world. Seams don't overlap where heat would trap company. You reach into your scrip and produce a little bone comb, the humble crown of personal politics. Quirky tidbit. Some travellers sprinkled fine ash through their hair as a desiccant snow, combing it out in the morning with the offenders, while others swore by placing a saucer of warm milk near the head to lure fleas into a milky doom, effectiveness dubious, smell unforgettable. You choose the comb and prayer method, which at least feels like a responsible conversation with your scalp. Boots now. You slide them toe to heel under the pallet, laces looped around the ankle, and then tied, not in a knot you can't defeat at dawn, but in a clever hitch you can loosen with one sleepy pull. The other custom whispers in the straw. Tie a lace to your wrist. It's not distrust, it's physics. In the gravity of night, objects drift. A clever hand could move a boot 3 pallets over without meaning mischief. Carried away by the tide of habit and temptation, you hedge against both. Joke 2. You consider leaving a small note in each shoe. I am already in a committed relationship, but paper is precious, and deterrence by string is cheaper. The room lowers its voice further. You listen to the dorm's grammar. Cough, comma, snore, semicolon, kettle period in the next room, as someone keeps the embers honest. You envy the children their ability to fall asleep in any paragraph. Your own sentence is longer. You take inventory of sensations and swap the louder ones for softer equivalents. The itch at your ankle becomes the memory of cool water in the basin. The draft at your neck gets traded for the weight of your cloak. The straw's prickle converts to the crunch of leaves underfoot earlier that day. This is dorm survival as translation. A blanket dispute flares near the door and extinguishes itself with admirable brevity. 2 men had drifted into one cover's territory. The porter, moving like a benevolent shadow, rearranges edges and applies the universal salve of a gently reproachful, "There we are." The dorm agrees, relieved that the parliament can recess. Historians still argue whether houses kept strict charts for bed allocations by status, infirmity, gender, or pay, or whether most places practiced flexible triage, moving bodies like furniture according to weather and crowd. Tonight, triage wins. The cough gets 2 blankets, the boy keeps his boots, and the massive snorer is politely stationed by the door where the draft negotiates a ceasefire with his volume. Privacy improvises. Curtains appear shawls tied to hooks, a cloak draped from a beam, a bed sack turned into a small wall. You look away as a woman climbs under hers, in the same way others look away when you reach under your cloak to rebuckle your belt. Eye contact is rationed. Words are soft currency. If someone needs to pray aloud, they do it with a voice that strokes rather than pokes. Joke 3. Someone in the far corner whispers a story so slow that by the time it reaches you, the plot has taken vows and retired from ambition. Your own turn comes with the knit comb again, a precaution disguised as ritual. You work from nape to crown, taps along the comb's spine counting time, and you wipe the teeth on a scrap you'll burn in the morning, because superstition and sanitation enjoy the same fire. Mainstream fact returns. Delousing was a ubiquitous part of pre-modern life. Linens were boiled in lye or vinegar when possible, and clothing hung over smoke or briefly scorched near heat to drive out vermin practices, recorded not just in medical texts, but in household advice and monastic rules. You will not scorch tonight, you prefer your cloak uncharred, but you do hang it near enough to the hearth's breath to suggest new accommodations to any ambitious tenants. Soft scandal. Somewhere, a sleeve brushes a sleeve. A hand withdraws too quickly. A laugh muffles itself in a blanket. The dorm knows these human stutters and lets them pass. Historians still argue whether mixed-gender sleeping was broadly permitted in small hospices or only in crisis crowding, with some regions likely stricter than others. You practice Switzerland, neutral, quiet, committed to good drainage and the general welfare. Midnight rehearses itself as someone at the hearth sets a new billet on the coals. The glow folds back toward itself, a red fox asleep in a nest of ash. The porter's slow tour of the room is both watch and lullaby. He pauses at the foot-laving stool as if remembering a story he didn't finish, then moves on. You adjust the diagonal fold again, corner over shoulder, edge under hip, and your shell taps a little lull against your breastbone. A metronome set to arrive, eventually. You think of rules, the kind that make a stranger's nearness tolerable. Shoes off the straw, spoons wiped before they travel, voices under a purring kitten, hands washed at the basin because water is the first and last courtesy. You tuck your staff's ferrule so it doesn't clink when you turn. The wormwood keeps its vigil, green and stubborn. You choose to trust the lace at your wrist, the porter at the door, and the ordinary decency of tired people who want the same boring miracle you do. 8 hours without incident. Dawn arrives on the soles of the watchman's feet. No trumpet, just the smallest thread of grey tightening the seams of the shutters. The bell offers a low syllable. Bodies rise like careful bread. Snores retire from public life. You slide your boots toward your toes with a one-pull blessing and feel their familiar compromise, never luxurious, always loyal. The comb goes back in the scrip. The blanket folds with the gratitude of a loan repaid on time. You finger the sprig's stem, mashed, fragrant, gallant in defeat, and decide to leave one small leaf on the shelf for the next traveller. The way someone left you, the watery light, the beam, the uncomplaining straw. You leave no review, only the courteous echo of quiet. Dorm choreography has taught you steps you'll repeat elsewhere. The diagonal fold, the comb's small patience, the lace hitch, the art of seeing without staring. Outside, the air meets you like a cool cloth to the face. The porter nods, measuring wetness with eyes alone this morning, and you nod back, both of you, pleased to discover how much privacy can be made from attention and how much peace can be made from rules that ask so little and give so much. Supper announces itself the way all worthwhile things do on the road, with a ladle clanging the rim and a smell that can't decide whether to be comforting or historical. You follow the gentle migration toward the kitchen, a civilized queue forming without anyone admitting they're in a hurry. The porter floats along the line, reminding everyone that bowls exist, spoons are real, and elbows have never yet improved the taste of pottage. You take your place, practice your calm face, and prepare to make the most of the medieval food pyramid, which is a triangle labelled pottage, bread, and please. The one-spoon rule governs this tiny republic. You carry your own, a smooth wooden oval with a handle worn into familiarity by 100 stews. The rule is simple enough to embroider. Do not dip your spoon into the communal pot. Let the ladler serve you. If you must share a bowl, wipe the spoon on a crust before passing, and never, not even in famine, lick a ladle. Joke 1. The ladle does not consent. The ladle is a public figure. The ladle has a union. A brother with wrists like rolling pins doles pottage from a cauldron that looks like it has seniority. Tonight its peas thicken to kindness. A few onion moons afloat, and the rumour of a bone that once passed this way in spring. You receive your measure into a clay bowl and step aside for bread. Trencher bread, coarse and sturdy. Yesterday's loaf promoted to plate by the magic of drying. You cradle it like a warm brick. Bread gets chores, bread doesn't complain. You sit on a bench that has known generations of knees and learn the choreography of bowls. Your neighbour, the widow with the rosary kitten snores, tilts her bowl so the broth deepens toward you, an invitation you politely resist because you have a trencher of your own and a spoon with vows. Etiquette is practiced as quietly as prayer. You keep your sleeves rolled, your spoon on your side, your jokes at half strength. You sop with the outer edge of the trencher, not the thumb side, because nobody wants to shake your hand at grace and taste supper. Mainstream fact puts its elbows on the table. Pottage. Thick vegetable stew with grains like barley or oats was a staple across medieval Europe, found in households humble and grand, varied by season and purse. Bread served as trenchers in many halls and inns, soaked with juices, and afterward eaten, given to the poor, or tossed to animals. You consider your trencher's future and hope you are not its final audience. The porter has a basket labelled almonry, and you plan for your plate to retire to charity rather than your midsection. Cups go around ale so small it could be legally adopted by water. You lift yours, careful not to let the foam become ambition, and sip. There's a pleasant cereal murmur to it, barley remembering sunshine. Quirky tidbit. Some households kept a tig, a multi-handled cup meant precisely for passing. Others used mazers, wide-lipped wooden bowls with a boss in the centre, engraved with blessings and warnings about drinking like a fool. Tonight you have a clay mug with a chip that looks like it survived a sermon. You pass it left as custom demands and practice the delicate art of not narrating your thirst. Bread etiquette for trenchers could be a college course, and you, fortunately, have a scholarship called hunger. You set the trencher flat under the bowl to catch ladle generosity. When heat has softened the crumb to a dignified slump, you lift the bowl, set it aside, and carve a bite from the corner, scooping gravy the way seabirds scoop light. You avoid the central swamp, the part that knows too much of the pot, and work the edges like a cartographer establishing borders. Joke 2. The middle of the trencher has confidential stamped on it. The edges are declassified. Your spoon explores the pottage like a curious diplomat. You find a carrot that has accomplished more with less than most nobles, a shred of greens with the personality of a mossy bell, and a barley pearl pretending to be treasure. The broth tastes almost like yesterday's water with ambition, which is to say the cauldron has opinions. You address those opinions with gratitude. A pinch of salt from your scrip, if the house allows you to season, and the quiet hope that tomorrow's pottage might remember pigs without violating the peace. If someone complains loudly, the porter performs the traditional ritual of pointing to the door labelled outside cuisine. Hand-washing returns to frame the meal. A boy carries an ewer and basin down the bench. You extend hands, palms down, and he pours while you rub without drama. A coarse towel follows, clean enough to make you feel you've entered civilization, rough enough to remind you who pays for linen. Historians still argue whether individual wooden bowls and spoons were widespread among pilgrims, or if many houses relied on shared crockery and the discipline of rinsing between uses. Your experience tonight is the middle path. House bowls, personal spoons, and a tub for brisk swirls under the porter's eye. Salt occupies the table like a dignitary. Not much, and not within reach of every hand brought by the server, distributed with the seriousness of a sacrament. You treat it with ceremony. A few grains on the trencher edge rescue a mouthful from monotone. You remember that in hall etiquette, the place of the salt marked rank the above the salt seats for the honoured, below for the rest. Here, rank is simple. Coughs get nearer the fire, the very tired claim the wall, and the person who helped carry wood receives more broth without anyone announcing why. Joke 3. You imagine a medieval food blog, 10 trencher hacks they don't want you to know, and immediately forgive yourself. Someone recites a bit of scripture before the second ladle. In some houses, a reader drones through a homily while you chew. In others, grey strands begin and end the meal, and the rest is the liturgy of bowls. Mainstream fact again, monastic refectories often enforced silence punctuated by readings, while secular hospices tended toward low conversation and practical notices: weather, road, thieves, a ferryman's hours. Tonight, silence rules until the last clink. Then the porter delivers a bulletin. The ford near St. Agnes is passable with caution. The Bridge Brothers posted a warning about the North Rail, and the Night Watch requests that no one practice sack juggling in the courtyard. A policy born from experience, you assume. You observe the one-spoon rule in action. A man across from you forgets and dips his spoon back into the communal sauce bowl after tasting. 3 eyebrows rise like small heraldic banners. The porter drifts over with a fresh bowl and the gentlest shrug. No one scolds. The correction is a breeze, not a storm. Etiquette on the road is less about shame, more about making tomorrow livable with the same faces. The hostler sets a wooden salt box back on the shelf, with the air of a banker closing a vault. A kettle of thin cider circulates for those who dislike ale, and a sister dispenses a smear of soft cheese to the visibly worn. Quirky addendum. In some districts, they call the pre-cheese wipe on the knife, blessing the blade, a reminder not to double-dip the knife after it meets your bread. You comply. The knife, grateful for your orthodoxy. A debate simmers as steadily as the pot. Meat days versus lean days. Historians still argue whether pilgrims on the move were regularly excused from fasting rules, allowed meat for strength, or expected to keep abstinence except in illness or feast. The house here favours fish when it can, and beans when it can't. Tonight is a bean night, and your spoon nods along, diligently collecting every bean from its social circle. When belly's quiet, cleaning begins, which is also etiquette with a broom. You carry bowls to the tub, rinse without volunteering your sleeve as sponge, and lay them rim down, where the air can have a say. The trenchers go to the almonry basket. You drop yours in with a small farewell to its patient crust. The bench wipes with a twist of damp cloth. Leftovers thin as monks go to the yard for animals that equate holiness with edible. You stand, stretch, and feel the soup settle into useful energy. If someone asks you how the broth was, the answer is a polite, honest, unless it was astonishing, in which case you say blessed and mean the cook as much as the pot. If it tasted suspiciously like yesterday's water, you add, good for the road. And everyone understands both your gratitude and your tact. The one spoon rule goes back into your scrip, the spoon dried on your sleeve's cleanest conviction. You join the small line at the basin again, hands washed free of the evening's history. When the bell finally speaks for lights, you are fed, not dazzled, and that is exactly right. Pilgrim food is a treaty between need and neighbour. You sign tonight with a spoon, a trencher, and a bit of quiet humour, and the treaty holds as you return to straw, thinking how the best bowls are never empty, they are simply passed on. Morning brings market voices as if the day itself were a stall holder. You follow the sound past a row of trestles, where everything the road believes about itself is for sale. Combs, pins, socks with ambition, and the small moons of pewter badges strung on twine like fish that learn to shine. Your scrip's flap is already a little constellation, 2 badges, and a memory of wax from when you used one as a seal, but the path ahead asks for a few more stars. You stop at a table where an old man with fingers like wire pulls a badge from the mould and drops it hissing into a pail. The metal steams like it's confessing. Pewter has the decency to be soft and affordable, which is why half the market wears it with pride. The badges crowd together. A bishop's mitre for one shrine, a sword and scallop for St. James, a little boat for St. Nicholas, a tiny silver-looking palm for a martyr who once had more pieces than a jigsaw. Mainstream fact steps into the aisle. Mass-produced pilgrim badges flourished from the 12th century onward, cast in lead tin alloys and sold near shrines like Canterbury, Rocamadour, Cologne, and Compostela, serving as souvenirs and proofs of passage. You lift a Rocamadour badge, Our Lady, tinier than a thumbnail, and feel the way it gathers stories the moment your fingers warm it. Etiquette at the badge stall is the opposite of impulse. You don't buy the whole string like a tree hoarding its leaves. You choose what the road will believe you've earned today. A little ampulla stamped with a cross and a saint's name, meant to hold a drop of holy water or oil. The maker crimps its lip with the quick gesture of someone who has crimped lips all his life, and hands it over with a wink that says, yes, it will leak if you bully it. Joke 1. You test its weight and declare it water-resistant, meaning resistant to ever having enough water for your expectations. You push on, and the market tilts from commerce to confidence tricks. A boy with hopeful eyebrows offers slivers of the true cross in a box carved with a lion. Another vendor promises feathers from St. Michael's wings, each feather looking suspiciously like it once belonged to a goose with a day job. You practice the gentle nod that means, I recognize your hustle and will not patronize it with coin. You've learned to ask for the seal wax, impressed by an authority whose authority is not just a cousin's handshake. Historians still argue whether local wardens consistently policed relic sellers or whether the free market of devotion simply corrected itself with side-eye and sermons. Today, the side-eye is strong. The sermons are implied. A little procession forms near the church porch. Someone whispers, relics. The word travels like a warm draft along the wall. You join the line because you understand both faith and curiosity, and because your shell taps your chest like a friend, reminding you to be brave in ordinary ways. The priest brings out a reliquary, golden, glass-sided, a small sparkle that prefers candlelight. The crowd hushes into a single shape. Mainstream fact clears its throat politely. Churches displayed relics, bones, hair, cloth, contact relics associated with saints in reliquaries for veneration. Practices ranged from kissing the reliquary to touching it with objects, and many shrines only showed precious pieces on feast days. You wait your turn. Etiquette is simple here. Do not shove sanctity, do not narrate your piety, keep your elbows and your skepticism both sheathed. You present the ampulla, and, when your turn comes, the priest touches it to the reliquary with the practiced lightness of a man who has made many moments feel unique. You feel nothing dramatic, no lightning, no booming voice, only the quiet relief of being one step further along a long sentence. A quirky tidbit arrives uninvited. Some pilgrims later steeped threads, or even the faintest shavings of their pewter badges in water, to make a saint broth for the sick at home, a practice equal parts placebo, prayer, and chemistry. You resolve not to serve pewter tea to anyone you love, but you do like the way the ampulla sits cool against your palm, like a small, obedient hope. Now the pardoner. You can smell him before you see him ink, wax, and the particular perfume of someone who travels with paperwork and opinions. He has a satchel of letters, each sealed with a blob stamped by a familiar bulla, and a voice that has chosen persuasive as its major. He unrolls one letter and reads in a sing-song cadence about days remitted from penance, about support for a bridge, a hospital, a chapel roof that leaks onto saints who deserve better. He does not mention the cut he takes. He does mention the sealing authority 3 times, and the word legitimate 4. You listen with the same attention you'd give a ferryman describing currents alert for eddies and rocks. Mainstream fact again. Indulgences, authorized by church figures, granted remission of temporal penalties due to sin, and could be attached to almsgiving for public works. Abuses and forgeries were notorious, so notorious that poets and preachers lampooned them. You've heard the jokes about pardoners who sold salvation by the yard. You've also seen a bridge and a hospice built by coins that travelled in satchels like this. He opens the price like a door you are not obliged to walk through. You examine a letter, tracing the seal's impression with your gaze. A cross, a name, a line of Latin that tries to look bored. Historians still argue whether ordinary layfolk grasped the theological fine print of indulgences, conditions, contrition, confession, or treated them as general warranties against misfortune. You are not a theologian. You are a walker with a scrip and a memory of how the bridge near St. Agnes saves ankles every spring. You choose a modest indulgence directed to that bridge brotherhood and ask for the date and your name to be written slowly, like a person savouring a kind word. Etiquette with pardoners. Do not heckle a seal, even if the man holding it looks like he could sell rain to a river. Ask which work the arms will serve. Ask twice if the answer has too many sunsets and too few stones. Do not wave your letter like a flag. Fold it and tuck it into your script behind the safe conduct, where wax won't argue with wax. Joke 2. You consider telling him your script is at capacity for absolutions and can only accept one more if it stacks neatly. Forgers thrive in the eddies of trust. A woman sidles up with a reliquary so gleaming it must have invented gold yesterday, offering private veneration for a small fee. Your staff votes no. You practice the market equivalent of sanctuary. You stay within the sound of the bell and the sight of the porch. If the object cannot tolerate daylight or questions, it is probably more goose than angel. You've learned the trick of watching how people carry holy things. The priest carried the relic as if it were breakable and already broken and somehow still whole. The woman carries hers like a salesman carries a sample case, sturdy, replaceable. The badge seller offers to stamp your ampulla with the day's date. You accept. He taps the soft pewter with a little die and leaves a clean, satisfying number. Your scrip adds its quiet clink when you drop the ampulla in. Your hat gets a new pin, a tiny scallop, to keep the shell company, because hat edges tell stories to strangers, and your hat might enjoy the conversation. Joke 3. You realize your hat now has a better resume than some minor nobles experienced in weather, proficient in pins, familiar with Latin abbreviations, references available upon request. A small debate breaks out near the stall about touching versus seeing. Some swear a relic's power flows only through hands and lips to heart. Others insist the gaze works as well as the kiss. Historians still argue whether contact was theologically necessary for all pilgrim devotions, or whether visual proximity and intention carried equal weight, with practice varying regionally and by shrine. You settle it for yourself the way you settle most things on this road. You act with courtesy and you act with need. Today you touched through pewter. Tomorrow you may only look and bow. By midday, the market thins and the road grows louder again, as if the path had eavesdropped and now wants to add its own commentary. The badges on your script click softly, friendly punctuation. The ampulla rides against your ribs, cool counsel for later. The indulgence letter sits behind the safe conduct like a well-behaved cousin. You leave a few coins at the porch box because coins are faster than sermons at patching roofs. As you step away, a child with solemn eyes points at your shell and grins. You touch the brim of your hat, a salute between travellers and the ones who will travel in their time. The bell in the porch tower lifts a modest note into the afternoon, not telling anyone what to do, just reminding the market that time is still in the business of passing. You walk on with your small museum. Pewter moons, paper with official wax sunsets, a drop of water that might be mostly memory. You feel no holier than when you arrived, only more tethered to bridges, to straw-filled rooms, to the slow civility of cues and kisses given to glass. If anyone asks what you collected today, you'll show them the badges, yes, but also the habit of asking for the seal, the patience to wait your turn, and the cheerful suspicion that knows how to say no, thank you, to a feather while still believing in wings. The road relaxes into water. Not a lake, not yet a river with ambitions, but the kind of wide, slow gleam that makes you reconsider every confident step you've taken since the gate bell last called you sensible. You pause at the bank where willow roots drink with both hands and study the ford you've heard about since the muleteer mentioned it and the hospice bulletin underlined it. St. Agnes, passable with caution. Caution, conveniently, is your new hobby. A ford is a conversation between stones and depth. You lower your lantern and read the grammar. Pale patches usually mean shallower sand or chalk. Dark glass hints at a hole where the river keeps its secrets. Riffled water over a line of bumps can be friendly stepping stones or the knuckles of a submerged argument. You tap with your staff. The ferrule rings dull, then bright, then dull again, letters you almost know. Mainstream fact keeps your elbows in. Fords were standard crossing points in the Middle Ages, often marked by stones or posts, and maintained, in the generous seasons, by local communities. Packhorse routes and ridgeways converged on the safest shallows, shifting with flood and drought, like a map that edits itself. Etiquette at a ford is patience with good shoes. You gesture to the couple with the goat and the boy on an overgrown hobby horse that hasn't had a hobby since Michaelmas. After you, you say, and they nod, because the order of feet matters when the water is busy doing its work. Joke 1. The goat studies the current like a seasoned engineer and proceeds with exactly the confidence you were pretending to have. You test the first stones, weight aching forward, hips loose, cloak lifted just enough to rescue pride without auditioning for river ballerina. The shell taps your chest in a tempo that suggests sensible caution rather than heroics. Midstream, you feel the push. Not much, but enough to remind you that rivers are polite only in public. You plant the staff upslope of your leading foot like a third leg with a union card. The boy laughs when you wobble, and you accept the critique. You arrive on the far bank with socks intact and dignity gently damp. Quirky tidbit. In some districts, locals swore that tying a small rush plait around the staff warded off sudden slips. You braided yours at a wayside cross this morning, which is why you absolutely meant to wobble for dramatic emphasis. Downstream, a bell clangs 2 notes, not quite a melody, but the sound of a profession. The ferry. You follow the bank path through reeds and find a flat-bottomed boat nosed into the mud, its plank drawn up like a tongue. The ferryman wears the alert slouch of a man who guesses the weight of strangers for a living. He eyes your scrip, your shell, your boots, and says, "The ford's friendly today." You nod solemnly, because friendly is not the same as loyal. Ferry etiquette is a minuet with money. You ask the price before you set a boot on the plank. He quotes 3 coppers and a blessing. You counter with 2 and a story about carrying news to the Bridge brothers. True. As it happens then, sweeten it with a promise to help with the pole if he lets you. Historians still argue whether pilgrims commonly travelled toll-free or at reduced rates on ferries and bridges, merely by flashing shells and safe conducts. Evidence suggests the kindness varied by region, temperament, and whether the ferryman's children had eaten breakfast. Today, your shell gets you down to 2 coppers and the loan of the pole, plus the understanding that if you fall in, you will make a good example for the next passenger. You step aboard with your weight low and your expectations lower. The boat lists away from certainty, and you plant the pole, pushing as if the river were a reluctant donkey you've grown fond of. The ferryman coaxes the bow toward the slack water between reeds and pierces the running seam with a small, righteous shove. Mainstream fact drifts by. Many crossings were controlled by ferrymen, with local rights granted by lords or abbeys who kept schedule loosely and prices loosely too. Where bridges failed, ferries thrived, and where floods laughed, ferries shrugged and counted coins. Midstream again, you hear the bell, this time a small bronze hung under the ferry's awning. He taps it with a knuckle. "For luck," he says. And so the river remembers we are customers, not furniture. Quirky addendum. Some ferries kept tokens nailed to the thwart, a coin, a saint's medal, a bent nail left by grateful crossers as talismans. The ferryman points to his little museum, a sparkle here, a dull shine there. You add one of your least persuasive buttons, and he gives it a place of honor near a flattened spoon. Joke 2. You promise the spoon is famous where you come from. On the far bank, you learn the other half of crossing etiquette. Say thank you like you mean it. You pay the 2 coppers, bless him as requested prose, not poetry, and he points you upriver. Bridge is a 1/4 mile along, he says. Chapel on the near end, toll on the far. Tell them the ford is low. He pauses. But mention I said the ferry was safer. You agree to deliver his advertisement with integrity. The bridge appears chatty from a distance, a series of low arches shouldering water, their piers fat with triangular cutwaters that split the current like wise noses. A squat chapel perches at the approach, its tiny bell coughing now and then. A carven tablet praises a brotherhood for their labours, stone-cut letters proud enough to invite a fingertip. Mainstream fact pulls up a stool. Bridge-building confraternities like the famous Brothers of the Bridge, Fratres Pontifices, and many local guilds organised funds, labour and maintenance. Some bridges even had tolls granted by royal or civic pontage charters for a set term, the revenue dedicated to repair. You run your thumb over the old authorization carved in the wall, imagining parchment and seals, and the triumphant day someone hammered the first pinning wedge into a new arch. The chapel door stands open, smelling of wax and wet stone. Travellers drift in to leave a coin, light a taper, and ask the river to remember humility next time it thinks about ambition. You add your coin, thinking of the indulgence letter folded behind the safe conduct and the practical theology of roofs that do not leak onto candles. Historians still argue whether bridge chapels primarily served as toll offices with pious trimmings or as genuine devotional spaces with accounting duties on the side. Today, the clerk behind the little counter has ink-stained fingers and a voice like a lullaby. 2 coppers for feet, she says. 1 for the poor, if you can. You can. You do. Toll etiquette is arithmetic with other people's stones. You count your coins where she can see the sum without leaning, which is also a lesson you learned at the badge stall. Transparency is the cousin of peace. She stamps a little lead token, soft as a sigh, with the bridge's mark, and hands it to you. For the far end, she says. You turn it over. The design is a tiny arch between 2 dots that might be saints or rivets. Joke 3. You consider starting a collection of stamped lead tokens, and then remember your script is already curating the world's quietest museum. Crossing a good bridge feels like walking on an idea that worked. The cutwaters part the flow, sending hatching patterns downstream. The spandrels carry people and carts, like a mother carries laundry and secrets. A mason's mark on one stone, 2 triangles touching at their points, reminds you that hands held chisels here, and those hands belonged to men who squinted into sun and wages. Quirky tidbit. Some bridges kept small niches halfway across where beggars or hermits sat, asking alms from travellers who had just discovered gratitude. A few niches still hold a chipped basin, or an inscription no one can quite agree how to translate. Halfway over, you stop to read the traffic. Polite passing has rules here too. Pack horses go single file on the upcurrent side, where their loads won't clip the parapet. Carts take turns at the bump-outs. Pedestrians squeeze and smile. A watchman stands with a billhook, and the authority of someone who has watched people invent new ways to be foolish in public. He eyes your shell, nods at your token, and reminds a boy not to dangle from the parapet like a misunderstood saint. At the far end, a second clerk collects your little stamped lead proof. You surrender it with the melancholy of a person parting from an object that just became affectionate, and the clerk thanks you in a tone that suggests she does, in fact, respect lead tokens as if they were pets. She points to a carved post listing tolls. A sheep, half, a pig, 1, a cart, 2, and the promise not to argue when directed. Mainstream footnote. Toll schedules varied comically by place. Some charged for a pack of wool, a horse laden, a horse bear, and sometimes threw in exemptions for clergy, locals on market day, or, ambiguously, pilgrims. Historians still argue how far those exemptions travelled from charter to practice. You were not exempt today. You were simply affordable. Beyond the bridge, your hem is still dry, which feels like a minor miracle and an argument for masonry. You look back and lift 2 fingers toward the chapel and the cut waters, a small vow that if you ever have more coins than blisters, you will stop and be part of some brotherhood's ledger again. The road straightens as if the bridge had taught it posture. The shell taps once, lighter now that it has watched you cross 3 different solutions to the same problem. Shallows, boats, stones. If someone asks what you learned at the water, you'll say, judge first, bargain second, thank always. Don't cut the line. Don't assume the shell is a credit card. Don't assume the ferryman's bell rings for decoration. Keep 1 coin for the clerk, 1 for the poor, and 1 for the impulse to nail a small thanks to a thwart where other thanks already shine. And when the current looks friendly, remember it isn't your friend. It is your neighbour respected, nodded to, lived beside, and crossed with care. Weather begins as a rumour on your skin. Before the cloud speaks in paragraphs, the hair on your forearm edits a sentence, the breeze practices a new accent, and the road's gloss turns from friendly to speculative. You tilt your face up and read the sky like a page you've dog-eared 100 times. High mare's tails combed thin cirrus, that means change on the way. A low lid of napped grey stratus thinking about drizzle, towers lifting in the west like slow alibis cumulus that might grow into theatrics if pride gets involved. You weigh the light and trust your nose. It has learned the coin sour of rain before rain. You loosen your cloak clasp, not to rush, but to admit that you and the weather are colleagues with overlapping jurisdictions. Mud science follows weather like a diligent clerk. The crown of the road, remember your first lesson, offers best footing when the ditches begin rehearsing ponds. Clay holds grudge and water both. Chalk pretends to be firm until it polishes itself to treachery. Gravel is the fair judge, rarely dramatic, never sentimental. You test with the ferrule, hear that honest clink that means the ground remembers rock. A cart has cut 2 trenches through a field entrance, each now a brown mirror. You know better than to walk in the mirrors. You step where small weeds still breathe. Roots mean stitching. Stitching means strength. Joke 1. You declare yourself adjunct professor of puddle avoidance and promise office hours immediately after any successful crossing. Mainstream fact taps you on the shoulder. Medieval farmers and travellers relied on weather lore, both practical and poetic. Red sky at night. Shepherd's delight. Halo round the moon. Rain soon. Swallows flying low. Rain on the go. Observations grounded in optics and pressure, shifts that still hold water, and sometimes dispel it. Pilgrims borrowed that lore with gratitude, adding saint day markers and local winds to their notebooks of skin. You note how chimney smoke lies flat, low-pressure lounging, how rooks circle restlessly in argument for finding shelter before the sky finishes its sentence. When rain arrives, it does so in grades. There's the honest sprinkle, the scolding shower, and the full theological dispute. You set your hood so it channels water off your nose instead of into your collar. You lift your hem with the 2-finger hold that preserves dignity without advertising calves. Your staff becomes conductor's baton, choosing the tempo of each step. The shell taps your chest like a metronome set to keep breathing. The road's top skin liquefies. Your job is to find the old bones beneath. You walk the edge where grass braids the bank and listen for the dangerous music suck, squelch, slide that tells you the mud wants your boot as a souvenir. Foot care governs everything under the cloud line. You halt under a hawthorn to do the unglamorous work that saves tomorrow. Loosen laces, check toes, air socks if you're luckier than most. Historians still argue whether woven socks were common among medieval pilgrims across regions, or whether many relied on simple foot wraps, rectangles of cloth bound neatly around foot and calf, cheaper, faster to dry, and surprisingly comfortable if you fold like a monk doing origami. Today your feet wear wool socks dyed the colour of sensible. You roll them down and marvel at the soft steam of effort. You check for hot spots, those little murmurs that, left unanswered, campaign for independence and form blisters with manifestos. Blister protocol is a rite. You dry the skin, never rub when wet. That way lies biography. Dust with a whisper of clean ash, or a dab of your trusty goose fat if water threatens. Lay a felt ring if you've got one, or a twist of soft wool, then lace so pressure shifts away from rebellion. Quirky tidbit. Some walkers stitched a single hair pulled from a horse's tail through a blister's roof to act as a wick, believing it would drain without tearing equal parts ingenuity and folklore. Others wrote the name of a saint on a scrap and tucked it under the sock, asking virtue to outrun friction. You settle for the wool ring and the gospel of patience. Road choice is shoe choice, you mutter, quoting the best advice you never quite heard. On clay, shorten stride. Fewer heel strikes, more midfoot, knees relaxed like you're bowing to a reasonable opponent. On chalk, avoid the polished slide. Aim for scuffed patches where someone else already argued and won. On gravel, trust it, gravel rarely lies. You tilt your soles toward contour, edge slightly uphill, and give the ditch the kind of respect you reserve for ferryman's bells. Joke 2. You promise your boots a union-mandated break, and they reply with a squelch that sounds like, carry on. Mainstream physiology slips in with a towel. Damp skin is fragile skin. Maceration turns callous to lace. So you practice the pilgrim's smoke break without the smoke feet bare for 5 minutes under a hedgerow, toes fanned to the wind, socks pinned to your staff like small flags of truce. You massage arches with thumbs that have learned new careers since you left the gate. If you had a sprig of rosemary from a hospitable yard, this is where you crush it into the skin and pretend you live in a bathhouse. If you have only water, that is still luxury. Pour, pat dry, and thank the hedge for the privacy of leaves. Cloud reading continues as you walk. You watch how shadows behave, hard-edged when the sun is unbothered, fuzzy when haze joins the conversation. You count seconds between a distant flash and a small, petulant thunder. 1, 2, 3, and do the math your schoolmaster insisted you would use someday. Historians still argue whether medieval travellers kept consistent. Portable time, bells vary, sundials sulk, but distance by pace and storm by count are clocks no bell can contradict. You pick the lane that keeps you away from lone trees and forked fences when thunder tests its aim. Shelter in a hedgerow or a low stone shed feels like an informed decision rather than cowardice with good branding. And then, because the sky likes jokes too, the rain stops as if a monk somewhere decided the reading hour required silence. The world smells green and metallic and faintly of relief. You take advantage. Socks trade feet to share moisture load. Laces get a kind tug, neither strangling nor shrugging. The shell receives a quick wipe because symbols appreciate housekeeping. You recall the hostel wormwood and smile at how many small, useful myths you are willing to carry. Wormwood for straw, rosemary for toes, rush plat for staff, and the firm conviction that a dry spare rag can negotiate peace treaties between skin and leather. The crown of the road offers an exam. 2 walkers approach, both eyeing the narrow, dry run as if it were a disputed duchy. Etiquette answers before pride testifies. You step aside for the heavier load, the older knees, the limping ankle. You keep your steps small so you don't baptize anyone with your efficiency. You lift the staff to show intention and refrain from speech until after passing, because people are more graceful when their mouths are closed and their eyes are on the ground. Joke 3. You consider painting lane lines and a tiny no-splash symbol on your cloak, but you settle for being a decent mammal with shoes. Mainstream fact returns with the day's closing arguments. Travellers often carried simple salves tallow with beeswax, lard blended with herbs like plantain or comfrey used for cracked heels and chafed seams. Monastic infirmaries recorded recipes with cheerful specificity, while household notes added, as much as seems right, which is both charming and chaos. You've mixed a thumbful in your script fat, a shred of beeswax, a green whisper of plantain soft enough to warm between palm and sole, stubborn enough to stay during a rain sermon. What's uncertain remains part of the walk. Historians still argue whether pilgrims planned rest days on strict calendars tied to markets and feasts, or simply surrendered to weather when it won the argument. Whether they chose ridgeway and wet by design or by rumour's tug, you make your peace with not knowing by making one good decision at a time. Stop early when socks fail, push on when wind clears and stones speak, trade speed for dignity when mud insists on conversation. By afternoon, the sky breaks into blue scraps stitched with white. Birds resume their committee meetings. The road dries from treacle to fudge to bread. You feel it under your soles in stages of ease. You find a stile, sit with feet on the lowest step so blood remembers uphill, and count blessings that look like chores. Checked hotspot, rotated socks, tightened laces in rain, loosened in sun, drank water when the wind lied about thirst. You press the felt ring once more for loyalty. The ferrule ticks approval against the stile. When you rise, the crown is yours for a few strides borrowed, not owned. You share it with the next coming shape, then with the next, because that is how roads stay civilized, even when the sky forgets its manners. Weather will surprise you again. Mud will campaign for your attention. Feet will petition for brakes as if employed by a very efficient union. Your part is simple. Read the clouds before they write the day. Read the ground before it edits your ankle. Read your feet as if they were sacred texts. If sermons fail, socks will preach, and they are almost always right. Dusk gathers the town like a cloak that has learned your measurements. You arrive under the first thin chime of evening, when the shop shutters blink, shut one eyelid at a time, and a watchman clears his throat as if he invented night. Street safety is a shared project, and the opening ritual is bells. A small bell nags from a lane chapel, a larger one rolls from the parish tower, and somewhere a housewife bangs a pan to hustle a stray hen past its bedtime. You read the notes as instructions. Slow your steps, shorten your errands, and keep your scrip where your hand can name it without looking. The curfew bell, couvre-feu, if you want to show off your French, tells citizens to bank hearths, shut doors, and let streets belong to the watch and the necessary. Mainstream fact stands by the doorway and nods. Many medieval towns enforced night curfews, closing or narrowing gates, and requiring fire covering and quiet. Watchmen patrolled with staves, lanterns, and the authority to rouse a hue and cry if trouble chose the wrong audience. You keep your lantern modest, its horn panes shading rather than boasting, because darkness is not your enemy. It's merely a co-worker with strict hours. Sanctuary lines are the map you whisper under your breath. You trace them with your feet as you enter. Church porch, yard, cross, boundary stone with a little incised key, a lane named for some long-ago bishop's temper. Not every town keeps them obvious, but most keep them in memory. If the night ever turns theatrical, you walk for the porch, because porches remember mercy. The sanctuary knocker iron ring, shaped like a lion biting a tongue, hangs like a doorbell with opinions. Quirky tidbit. Some towns kept a sanctuary mat or safe bench inside the porch, a literal plank of truce where a fugitive could sit while clerks took notes and tempers cooled. You hope never to audition for the bench. You note its location anyway, the way you note fords even when bridges exist. Street manners after bells have a different grammar. Keep to the crown when the lane sloshes, but drift toward the centre even on dry stone. Distance is safer than walls where doorways hatch sudden conversations. You carry the staff low, not like a challenge, more like a walking sentence with a polite period. Your shell and badges gleam enough to read as pilgrim, not target, to anyone with a mother, a conscience, or a fear of saints. Your scrip strap crosses your chest under the cloak, now habit, not panic, and your hand rests ready like a friend who knows when to become obvious. Joke 1. You imagine your scrip practicing invisibility and award it a certificate for outstanding blending, urban category. IS. The watchman appears, a silhouette with a billhook and a lantern that seems to be thinking about bedtime. He asks for your business, and you answer in a complete sentence. Straw at St. Leonard's Hospice, out again at first bell. Watchmen prefer specifics. Vague is the night's second cousin. He nods, gives directions that are 90% right and 10% tradition, and reminds you to avoid the arcade by the tanners, lantern boys, he says, meaning the enterprising thief's trick of a lamp left in the dark to pull the eye while a partner studies your purse strings. You thank him with the respect due to a man who has seen every variant of foolish. Historians still argue whether sanctuary protection reliably extended into adjacent streets or stopped strictly at church thresholds, and whether towns bent rules on curfew for pilgrims as often as romantic tales suggest. You plan by the stricter book. If you need mercy, you go to the door that can give it, not to the alley that promises it might. Meanwhile, you practice the small arts of urban survival that never go out of style. Walk like you know where you're going. Pause where light pools and faces carry. Greet dogs before they decide your existence needs editorial work. Dogs, inevitable as weather, patrol with a professionalism you respect. A scrap of crust in your pocket persuades one to invest in diplomacy. Another sniffs at your staff and recalls ancient treaties between paws and ferrules. Joke 2. You file a formal complaint with the Guild of Midnight Dogs about their enthusiastic, tail-based tripping hazard, and the guild replies by wagging harder. Night bells are more than curfew. They're clocks in an era allergic to wristwatches. The Compline bell sighs from the monastery bookends on the day's pages. Later, the night watch bell ticks the hour like a sleepy metronome, and sometimes a work bell clanks where bakers knead the dawn into existence. You use their rhythm to choose your route. Through the street, where the baker's light spills flower lace on cobbles, not the lane where dye vats brood with yesterday's insults. Past the smithy where embers breathe, not the blind corner where shutters whisper to each other about wallets. Your spoon, yes, that spoon stays in your scrip. You're not defending yourself with cutlery when the watchman carries a hook and a municipal frown. There's a legal music under all this. If trouble stirs, the watch raises the hue and cry. Neighbours rattle windows, grab staves, and the night blossoms into community theatre with real consequences. Mainstream footnote. Common law expected bystanders to pursue felons on that cry, and failure could attract fines. Private silence was not a civic option. You prefer the kind of evening where the hue and cry is a story told at breakfast about someone else. But you mark the nearest front steps you could borrow if running becomes too interesting. The tanner's arcade hunches like a frown. You obey the watchman and take the longer way, where a shrine lamp pools patient honey on a corner. A beggar there lifts an eyebrow at your shell, and you give a coin because bridges don't maintain themselves and neither do lungs. He warns you about hookmen cut purses who fish scrips with small iron crooks from benches or windows when travellers daydream. You nod and keep the strap tight. Quirky addendum. Some towns posted iron spikes under projecting ledges to prevent precisely that kind of fishing. A medieval version of "Please don't sit on this railing." Gravity is undefeated. The hospice door stands within a small neighbourhood of light, which is reason enough to belong to it. Before you knock, you rehearse the backup plan. Sanctuary line to the parish porch, watch station 2 corners back, baker's door for human eyes, the street pump if you need the honest distraction of water and neighbours. Joke 3. You consider drawing a tiny map on your palm, but your palm is currently employed as wallet security department, and you decide to outsource cartography to your excellent memory. Inside the hospice, you learn the town's second set of night rules. Shutters hooked, hearth banked, gate chained at the quietest link. The porter takes names softly and points to a rack of pegs. Cloaks there, staffs below, scrips kept with the body if light, heavy bundles left in sight, not hidden, because visible temptation creates communal guardianship, while hidden temptation creates stories you cannot end well. The bell here is smaller than last night's, but no less opinionated. No lamps after bell, the porter says, unless the midwife's at work. A woman near the fire laughs, or unless Brother Martin tries to read by memory again, she adds. Everyone smiles the way townspeople do when they've already forgiven each other for being themselves. You step back out briefly to breathe the street's cooler sentence. The watch makes another round. A youth with too much confidence tests the echo with a whistle and promptly receives a lecture on echo's rights. Somewhere, a lute suggests that romance wants to negotiate, and a window suggests that romance try again after harvest. You check the moon halo faint, which your weather law reading list translates as wet tomorrow, perhaps, and then you lock your gaze on the path back to the door because laneways are skittish and attention is a leash. All the while, sanctuary remains the quiet option folded in your pocket like a letter you hope never to mail. Historians still argue whether the famous 40 days of sanctuary time for confession, negotiation, exile was universally honoured or frequently bartered down in the friction of local politics. You translate the debate into your own rules. Respect porches, respect bells, walk centre, greet dogs, count windows, trust bakers, keep the knocker in your peripheral map. The town gives you its best in exchange. Pools of honest light, the curfew's soft fence, the sense that the night has an organised face. When the final bell smooths the air, you stand in the doorway of straw and discipline, offer a small nod to the street, and step inside. The porter secures the chain with the tired tenderness of a man who has locked this door so many times it has become a prayer. Tomorrow you will walk out again at the first honest grey, when dogs yawn at the moon and the watch counts one last hour. Tonight you belong to bells and pegs and the soft democracy of shutters. Your shell settles against your chest, your script's knot approves of itself, and you remember the ferryman's bell, the bridge's clerk, the hostel's footstool, each a small, ringing yes that says, live through the night and walk in the morning. Morning unspools like ribbon, and the road reveals its cast. You're not alone in this long sentence. There are commas and semicolons all around you, walking at their own punctuation. First you match pace with a widow in a dark wool kirtle, her veil pinned neatly, hands tucked into the sleeves the way women have kept their warmth and opinions for centuries. Her stride is small but relentless. She takes the crown when the mud allows, offers it back when the goat behind nudges, and never, ever splashes. You learn something about dignity that no bell taught you. Women walk this road by the book and by the rumour. Some travel in pairs for safety and serenity, some with kin or guild companions, a few with the contained ferocity of those who have done things harder than mud. Etiquette begins with eyes. You look up, you greet clearly, and you keep your gaze useful, not nosy. Where paths narrow, you step aside sooner for a woman bearing a child or a basket. When you speak, you keep your words as practical as your staff, where the ford runs shallow, which hostel kept decent straw, whether the Tanner's Arcade has lantern boys working overtime this week. Joke 1. You try to make space the way a door does, wide enough, quiet enough, and never asking for thanks. Mainstream fact slips into stride. Women did undertake medieval pilgrimages, nobles like Marjorie Kempe dictating her visions and vexations, abbesses travelling under protection, widows honouring vows, tradeswomen tying journeys to fairs. Documentary traces appear in wills, guild records, miracle collections, and penitential manuals that alternated between warning and blessing. Historians still argue whether women's numbers were modest ripples or steady currents on popular routes, with survival bias in records obscuring the feet that actually walked. You prefer evidence drawn in dust, the ladies' patterns in your peripheral vision, the veil pins glinting at dawn, the way two friends share a roll of linen and a joke about blisters as if they invented both. Children walk too, some clutched to chests, some perched sideways on pack animals, some legging it with alarming joy that ignores geography. Their etiquette is louder but honest. Call your puddle before you jump. Count to 3 before you pass the spoon. Share the crown of the road as if the crown were a toy you're proud to lend. You carry a spare biscuit in your scrip for the small diplomat who negotiates peace between a tired mother and a longer-than-advertised hill. Quirky tidbit. On certain routes, locals tied little bells to toddlers' belts, angel bells. They called them so the sound told feet where hands were. You heard one this morning chiming like a sparrow with opinions behind a hedge. Guardianship is a craft every traveller learns in parts. In villages, women sometimes fall in with parish confraternities for the day. A guild sister at the front, a broad-shouldered uncle of somebody at the rear, and in the middle, the quiet commerce of looking out for one another without turning concern into custody. You adopt the same habit with strangers when the path grows lonely. Walk near enough to be counted, far enough to be considerate. You ensure the goat stays on the riverside, not the cliffside. You call out step when a route hides under leaves like a prankster with poor impulse control. Joke 2. You draft a tiny charter, the mud rights of all persons, including goats, and get it ratified with a nod and a laugh. Not everyone walking fits the tidy figure in the shrine painting. There's a pair of Romani tinsmiths who keep to the verge and give the watchman a glance as practiced as your lantern tilt. There's a Moorish physician's apprentice hired by a merchant family for the journey, counting pulses like rosary beads during rests. There's a former soldier with one shoulder higher than the other, carrying a staff banded with iron and regrets. Outsiders, they're called by those who forget that roads belong to feet before they belong to names. Your etiquette is straightforward. Greet first, ask second. Never require anyone to audition for your comfort. Mainstream fact reminds you that medieval Europe was busier with movement than classroom. Maps imply merchants from the Baltic in Bordeaux, Jewish physicians consulted by bishops and beggars, itinerant craftsmen following cathedrals, Roma camps shadowed by suspicion and skill. Pilgrims walked among this traffic, not above it. Historians still argue whether lay travellers commonly formed mixed companies across faith and ethnicity for stretches of road, or whether most groupings stayed within familiar lines, with exceptions clustered around market towns and ports. You've seen enough to know that shared weather and a bad ford make neighbours out of strangers faster than sermons do. Modesty on the road is not a sermon either. It's strategy. Women tug veils closer in windy lanes because veils keep dust from teeth and comments from amateurs. Men lower their voices near lone travellers because night remembers words and repeats them poorly. You practice the 2-pace buffer, a living curtain between you and any woman walking alone, and you let her set the speed and the silence. If she wants company, she invites it with a question about the bridge toll. If she wants space, her shoulders say so, and you read shoulders as fluently as clouds now. Debates happen, softly, between breaths. A weaver insists women should travel only to local saints, for propriety's sake, quoting a cousin who quotes a priest. A seamstress replies that St. James isn't propriety, he's a direction, and anyway she has cousins on the road, and hands that can tie 3 knots faster than his mouth can set 2 opinions. Historians still argue whether clerical guidance genuinely confined most women to short pilgrimages, or whether practice outpaced preaching, whether chaperonage was insistence or convenience. You accept the verdict of the mile. She walks, therefore she walked. Children, again, bring the road's humour and hazard in the same pocket. One little boy practices mud skating along the ditch edge until physics files a complaint. You catch him by the script strap, and his mother pays you with a smile large enough to spend twice. You pass a group of girls chanting the stations of the road they've invented: Ford, bread, bell, bridge, jumping each word like it were a square chalked on stone. You offer your spoon to stir their imaginary pottage, and they squeal as if you produced a dragon. Joke 3. Unite a 7-year-old with your staff for slaying a puddle, and he promises to found the Order of the Dry Hem. Outsiders include the visibly poor vagabonds in the strict sense and the accidental sense. Alms are not infinite. Etiquette steers coin toward the box at the bridge chapel, and bread toward the hand that looks today like your tomorrow. You give where the road taught you. 1 for the poor, 1 for the toll, 1 for the porter's patience. You also give attention, which is sometimes worth more than crusts. Warn a drunk he's walking the wrong side near a cart. Stand between a loud mouth and a quiet girl, until the loud mouth remembers his mother. There are rules no parchment wrote, enforced by looks rather than fines. Don't question a woman who stops at the shrine and weeps. The road does accounting you'll never see. Don't test a man with a scar and a long silence. He may carry a story with sharp edges. Do share weather as if it were bread. Thunder in the west. Temple Lane is slick. The ferryman likes 2 coppers and a blessing. Modesty, pace, guardianship, all 3 behave like water, take the shape of need. Move around stones. Keep going. You practice being the kind of traveller you want to meet. When a group asks you to walk behind them, you walk behind. When they ask you to walk ahead, you walk ahead and taste the weight of being a shield. When they ask nothing, you listen to what their feet say faster when fields are open. Slower near hedges that hide surprises, clustering tighter in town where lantern boys perform their little theatre. You don't turn kinship into custody. You don't let courtesy become fear. You are capable of stepping aside, of stepping up, and of shutting up. The road applauds with a small squelch. Mainstream fact offers one more thread. Confraternities sometimes organized escort days for vulnerable travellers, widows, the sick, the very young, posting notices at church doors after Sunday Mass, so volunteers could meet at the cross and walk together to the next hospice. Historians still argue whether these were formal systems with rosters or ad hoc kindness scaled up by habit. Either way, you've seen the practice in miniature all morning. 3 women beside a hedge, a wounded veteran on the crown, you and your staff on the ditch side, all moving with the slow choreography of people who have decided not to be accidents. By noon, the company thins children nap on shoulders, the widow prays without moving her lips, the tinsmiths peel off toward a farm that needs its pot handle reborn. You keep on, shell tapping out a courteous tempo, staff writing small letters to the ground. Here, still here. You look back once and see a shape that pleases you. The road as a ribbon stitched with different threads, none identical, none in charge, all needed. If someone asks you who walks, you'll answer. Everyone the day permits, everyone the weather can bear, everyone the road will teach. And if they ask what to do about that, you'll say, make space, match pace, and be the kind of neighbour your future self will thank you for remembering to be. Heat stacks itself on your shoulders by mid-afternoon, and the road begins to taste dusty, like bread without salt. A little black flag of Swifts scribbles overhead, and then you see it. A walled enclosure with a red-washed cross above the gate, 8 points like a star that has learned to fold its arms. The commandery of the Hospitallers sits where 2 routes marry. You can tell from the way the lanes lean toward it as if asking for a drink. You rap your staff wooden side on the wicket. A lay brother opens, eyes quick, hands practical, and ushers you into a courtyard cool with troughs, shade, and the sound water makes when it remembers generosity. Water for pilgrims. the brother says, pointing to a stone basin. You set your shell aside today, the basin is cleaner than your pewter, and cup your hands. The first swallow is a small miracle that refuses applause. You rinse your face and feel dust surrender. Quirky tidbit drips in with the water. Some houses flavour the trough with a sprig or two, mint or hyssop, to sweeten the mouth, a kindness to the nose as much as the tongue. Today's basin holds a few floating leaves that have chosen the monastic life. You fish one out, smile at its vocation, and let it return to its order. Rules at the gate are posted where even a distracted mule could read them. No loud bargaining, no weapons bared, fire only in the kitchen, straw after prayer, beggars fed at the outer table at sunset. Mainstream fact stands by the board like a scribe. The Knights Hospitaller, originally the Order of Street. John ran hospitals, hostels, and commanderies along routes in the Holy Land and across Europe, extending practical charity, water, medicine, shelter to the poor and to pilgrims. Their houses functioned as way stations, as well as administrative hubs, supported by lands and rents. You sign your presence in the simplest ink, your shadow crossing the courtyard, and accept a ladle from a novice who treats your thirst as both ordinary and important. The refectory here hums without noise, which is a trick monasteries practice until it sticks to their walls. A brother with a linen head wrap checks your feet with 2 glances. You've come to respect that medical literacy, the way eyes triage pain by the shyness of a gait and the shape of a sock. He gestures you to a bench while he fetches a small jar. Comfrey, he says, and plantain in goose fat. And you nearly laugh because your scrip already carries a cousins of that mixture. He applies a thumbful to a hot spot with the tenderness of someone who has seen what a neglected blister can do to a soul. Joke 1. He warns you not to eat it, and you promise not to discover whether it pairs well with pottage. Beyond the far wall, you hear the metal grammar of a forge hammer, anvil, the breath between. The order keeps a smith because wheels and soles crack at similar hours. In the shade of an arcade, a map hangs painted on a board, a pilgrim's calendar of distances and dangers, ford depth marks, ferryman names, one of which you recognize, and you grin at the thought of your flattened spoon in his little museum, bridge tolls, and a note about lantern boys near the tanners, which crosses half a country with you like a travelling moral. The board is updated in charcoal. Someone wipes and redraws in the neat impatience of people who like facts better than rumours. Not all crosses here are 8-pointed. A white mantle with a red cross hangs from a peg in a guest alcove. Templar, the other military order, with the famous banner of austerity and accountants. A sergeant in travel-stained gear greets a hospitaller brother with the shoulder clasp of men who have learned to be polite in armour. Mainstream fact leans in. The Templars' Order of the Temple protected pilgrims, fortified routes, and ran a sophisticated network of banking services. A traveller could deposit in one house and withdraw, by coded letter, in another safer than stuffing all your coin into a scrip and hoping your knots were moral arguments. Historians still argue whether ordinary pilgrims commonly used those letters of credit, or whether they remained tools of wealthy merchants and crusaders. The romance of the system outpaces the footprint of receipts we can actually point to. A lay sister brings out a board etched with house rules for guests, the kind of governance that makes nights breathable. Boots under the bed, scrips under cloaks, lamps out with the bell, no singing after the second ladle, unless you are a nightingale on retainer. She adds the local appendix, no washing linen in the well. Leave space on the bench for the infirm. Do not correct the porter's opinion even when it's wrong. It rarely is. Joke 2. The last line reads, "Do not feed the guard dog bread, he becomes proud." And an extremely proud dog lies beneath it, pretending not to read. You accept a wooden token stamped with the housemark cross and palm to hang on your scrip for the night. It tells the porter at the inner gate that you belong to the straw you've been promised. You wash at the basin, the same way you learned in St. Giles's hospice. Hands, then face, with the ladle's quiet diplomacy. The shell bumps your chest like a polite reminder. Remember the bridge, the ferry, the ford. Remember the basin at your first hostel. Remember the wormwood and the bell. Remember why you carry a spoon. Water is the through line, the road's favourite lullaby. The hospitallers hum it better than most. After a short grace in the chapel, stone cool, beeswax frank, a window wedge spilling a wedge of blue, you stroll the outer ward. A notice posted by the gate lists, which local confraternity will tend which stretch of road after the next storm. St. Michael's Guild, takes the causeway to the older copse. St. Anne's weavers promise to patch the stile by the mill. The Bridge Brotherhood, you feel kinship already, will inspect cutwaters and chase driftwood from the piers. Mainstream fact nods along. Lay confraternities and guilds frequently maintained paths, bridges, and parish infrastructure. Coordinating alms and labour at a scale monasteries and lords alone could not meet. Charters and church porch notices organise the civilising maintenance that keeps mud from becoming a theology. The commandery kitchen smells like bread develop nodding opinions. A novice spoons you a ladle of lentils and sets a heel of dark loaf on your trench, not, with the practised grace of someone who knows hunger, rarely complains when fed honestly. In a corner, a small cabinet holds a box labelled almonry, and you drop in the coin you promised the bridge clerk, because promises are a pilgrim's currency when pockets are shy. Debate lives here too, couched gently between chores. A visiting canon argues in a low voice with a lay brother about whether the order's lands have strayed from their first purpose. Historians still argue whether the Hospitallers and Templars, as they gained wealth, drifted from care and protection toward bureaucracy and politics, whether their hospitals remained models of charity in every district, or only in the ones with a brother who loved rules because he loved people. You resolve the argument for yourself by looking at the basin, the salve, the proud dog, the shaded bench where an old woman with river ankles naps without fear. Some houses remember their first love. This one does. On a shelf near the dispensary sits a row of small glazed pots labelled in a tidy hand. Plantago, salvia, ruta, mel, rosatum, plantain, sage, rue, honey of roses. You remember the rosemary on your toes, the wormwood in the straw, the felt ring you cut from an old mitten. All your road medicine rhymes with theirs, which makes you feel less like an improviser and more like a very junior apprentice in a school the world has been running for centuries. Joke 3. You consider applying to this school with a thesis on advanced puddle etiquette, but you suspect the admissions committee demands fewer jokes and more Latin. Even constables of charity have schedules. A bell chimes the hour for the outer pour. Bowls are set along a bench at the outer gate, and the queue forms with the quiet dignity of necessity. House bread goes first to the hollow-eyed, then to travellers with documented purposes, then to anyone whose pride makes a fist and then relaxes. You take your place to the side, because today you are neither hollow-eyed nor brave enough to put your pride down for bread you can still buy with coins. But you watch, because watching is a kind of tithe. Before you leave, the brother at the gate points to a parchment pinned beside the rules, a letter of peace issued jointly by local confraternities, promising that anyone wearing the shell and behaving by the posted customs, no brawling, no cheating scales, no lying at the ford, will be escorted through the next troubled stretch by volunteers on market day. The seal wax is the colour of cherries. You imagine the procession, the widow from yesterday on the crown, the tinsmiths at the rear, your staff on the ditch side, the proud dog absolutely not being fed bread, everyone pretending safety is ordinary. It almost is, if enough people decide it will be. You thank the brother with the salve. He thanks you for the mint leaf you rescued and rehomed with dignity. You shoulder your scrip, tokens clinking softly, bridge, house, small acts, and step back onto the road that seems cleaner for having been invited to sit and drink. The 8-pointed cross shrinks behind you. The shell taps your chest in a rhythm you recognize. Walk, wash, walk, rest, like a refrain, catching at the edge of sleep. If anyone asks what the orders do, you'll say, they remember water, they practice rules that smell like bread, and they post notices that tell the mud it does not get the last word. And when asked who keeps the roads passable, you'll add, the hands of neighbours, the ink of confraternities, the stubborn bellies of bridges, and the quiet, posted sentences that teach strangers how to share a gate. Clerks smell like ink the way ferrymen smell like rivers. By late afternoon you're herded gently toward a table under a porch where a notary has turned bureaucracy into a sacrament. His quill lifts, dips, and lands with the authority of a hawk that has audited 1,000 fields. You ease your scrip onto the table and take stock of your little archive. Safe conduct, indulgence letter for the bridge, the token from the Hospitallers, and the modest ampulla that clinked against your ribs all morning, like a polite reminder to behave. Paper first. Your safe conduct is folded into a clever packet, outer flap blank, inner flaps guarded by wax. You open it just enough to show the seal without inviting weather to read. Mainstream fact steps in with tidy shoes. Medieval travellers often carried letters of protection or conduct from lords, abbots, town councils naming the bearer, destination, and time window, authenticated by seals. Such documents helped at gates, with watchmen, and when crossing jurisdictions that liked to pretend they were countries. You lay the letter so the notary can see the bulla shine, that small wax planet stamped with a familiar device. He nods, the nod of a man who appreciates planets that haven't fallen. Etiquette at the clerk's table is simple. Don't elbow, don't sigh theatrically, and never let your quill envy show. You state your business in one sentence, confirm my safe conduct, note my passing for the bridge ledger, and advise if the archdeacon stamps for pilgrims on market day. He approves your brevity with a grunt, elegant enough to be Latin. Joke 1. His pen looks like it charges by the sigh. You promise to keep your breathing fiscally responsible. He warms a little wafer of red wax over a lamp, presses a counter-seal on your conduct, no new promise, just a courteous scene, and enters your name onto a roll ruled with a string. Quirky tidbit. Many clerks stretched a thin thread along the parchment edge as a straight edge, pricking tiny guide holes with an awl so lines behaved. The thread doubles as an improvised bookmark, and, in one house you visited, a cat toy for an administrative cat of excellent character. Next comes the indulgence letter you bought in good faith by the bridge. You show the seal, the date, the purpose. You do not wave it like a talisman against rain, thieves, or blisters. Historians still argue whether layfolk understood indulgences primarily as relief of temporal penalties after confession, or as general spiritual insurance practice varied by region, preacher, and purse. You choose the practical reading. You gave coin to keep stones over water. The letter is a receipt with theology. The notary eyes, the seal's impression, compares it to a matrix he keeps in a little box, a dollhouse of authority, and nods. Good work, the brothers, he says, which you accept on their behalf. He slides you a scrap of oiled parchment, water-shy like a duck, and advises you to wrap both letters against weather and jostle. You do, tucking a thin cork wafer between seals so they don't kiss and smudge. Joke 2. You consider inventing bubble wrap 4 centuries early. You settle for breadcrumb cushion and a promise to hold your scrip like a civilized marsupial. Proof of going matters as much as permission to go. The notary points you toward the archdeacon's clerk, who sits behind a bell small enough to forgive itself. She keeps a passus book steps, book recording pilgrims through town on holy days, so the bishop's office can brag properly at Easter. She asks your name, birthplace, last hostel, and the word you would like written on your soul in case she had a larger book. You answer with mercy, which fits in any margin. Mainstream fact peeks over her shoulder. Church offices and confraternities kept lists, registers, and sometimes gave tokens or notes to travellers' badges, pewter signs, or written testimonies, more often in big centres, less in small parishes. You ask the question that's followed you since the shell first bumped your chest. At the shrine, do I receive a writing? She tips her head. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims to major shrines like Santiago routinely received written certificates, what the moderns call a compostela, or whether badges, witness, and sometimes a priest's oral attestation sufficed. Documentation thickens later, thins earlier, and local habits colour the gaps. Some do, some don't, she says. Trust your feet, and keep your papers dry. Feet first, paper second, story third, your new creed, entirely recyclable. You cue at the notary's neighbour, the seal keeper. He wears a chain with 2 matrices, one civic, one ecclesiastical, and the faintly harried air of a man who knows wax is a season. He offers to stamp your scrip flap with the town's mark, a courtesy some burgesses extend, for a half copper, so watchmen at the farther gate will see you truly passed here, not invented the town in your mouth. You pay, and he presses a small impression into a blob of wax on your leather, where it will surely fail in 3 rains, but will look very official until then. Joke 3. Your paperwork now has more stamps than your socks have dry patches. Your socks request parity and are denied for administrative reasons. The clerkly world is a theatre of dates, and you learn to read them, as travellers do, by saints rather than numbers. Your indulgence bears, in the octaves of St. Michael, your safe conduct from the calends of May until the Ascension, the passus book on the vigil of St. Martin. You copy the sense into your own private calendar. After Michael's geese, before the fields sleep, while the bridges still remember summer. Mainstream fact: notarial and chancery dating formulas mingled Roman calends, nones, ides, regnal years, and liturgical feasts. Lay travellers translated them into seasons, markets, and harvests, the kind of time your feet can measure. Seals deserve a sidebar, because seals decide whether strangers listen. Wax is temperamental too hot, and it slumps like custard, too cold, and it shatters like a bad argument. You learn the trick of warming it near, not in the lamp, breathing on it once, then letting the matrix kiss and leave. Quirky tidbit: some great houses kept seal cakes scented with resin and herbs, a little olfactory flourish to their authority. Smaller offices carried pouches of sand to cool seals faster, so documents could travel before gossip did. You do the practical version. Keep the letter flat until the wax forgets it was ever liquid, then sandwich it in oiled parchment like a sandwich for a very nervous lunch. Destination proof: how you'll whisper to the next town, the next ferryman, the people back home that you didn't just talk about going but did it. Options multiply. A priest at the porch offers to note your visit on a rota, a circular list hung beside the font. Your name will fade slowly under candle smoke, which feels romantically accurate. A guild scribe offers a stamp in your personal booklet if you had one. You don't, so she stamps a corner of your safe conduct that has room to breathe, careful not to trespass on prior wax. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrim passports with serial stamps existed beyond scattered practices, or whether this is a modern standard retrofitted to older habits. What we can point to are badges, letters, notarial copies, and witnesses with good memories. Witnesses matter most. You ask the baker who sold you the morning heel to write an X beside your name in the chapel's register. He does, leaving a flower fingerprint as proof of presence more eloquent than any seal. You ask the watchman to mark down that you departed by the north gate at the second bell after none. He shrugs, watchmen dislike ink, but grunts an assent that lives in his head instead. When you move, you invite small testimonies to walk with you, fewer than rumours, sturdier than boasts. You spend a coin to have the notary copy your safe conduct in his ledger, a common service in case you lose yours to weather or sudden clownery. He scribbles the gist: name, marks, dates, issuing hand, and the clerkly equivalent of looked like he'd slept at a hospice and knew which end of a staff to hold. Mainstream fact again: notaries provided authenticated copies and memoranda. While central registries were rare, local books served as communal memory, insurance against loss, and fodder for future disputes. You leave knowing that, in this town at least, you briefly exist on more than one sheet. A small, practical ritual ends the hour. You assemble your document packet like a very polite sandwich, letters facing out so seals don't argue, oiled parchment wrapping all, a thin board pilgrim technology, any stiff scrap, to keep creases from becoming catastrophes. Then all tied with a thong and slid into the inner script sleeve. The sleeve shares space with your spoon because nothing bad ever came of pairing mercy with pottage. You test the knot, then tether the packet to the script strap with a short cord. The night moves objects like tides. You have learned counter tides. You step from shade into evening with a new lightness that has nothing to do with weight. Your proof feels sufficient without feeling boastful. A seal that still remembers the matrix. A town stamp the colour of cherries. A baker's flower thumbprint. A name tucked into a porch book beside a saint's vigil. If someone in the next hostel asks, "Did you walk?" you can answer without opening your script. Show the mud at your hem, the proud blister ring you treated with comfrey, the way your staff knows the grammar of puddles. Paper helps strangers decide quickly. Feet persuade them finally. If the shrine at the road's end gives you a writing, you'll take it with quiet hands. If it gives you only a shell's cousin, a blessing, and a look that says, "We believed you," you'll take that too. Historians still argue which proofs counted most in which century. You find that your favourite proof is the chorus of small witnesses: the ferryman's flattened spoon in his little museum, the bridge clerk's token, the hospitaler's salve thumbprint, the watchman's memory, the baker's flour. Together, they stamp you better than wax ever could. Night edges in. You tuck the packet deeper and let the shell tap once documented, not defined. Tomorrow you'll need to show a seal to a gate, a smile to a porter, a coin to a toll, and patience to everyone. You're rich enough in all four to keep walking. Morning markets are the road's gossip in tangible form. You drift into a wayside fair, where trestles bloom like quick houses, and canvas awnings yawn against the sun. Everything whispers useful or shiny, sometimes both. Shells wink in baskets, scallops rubbed with sand until they look like patient moons, while pins bristle from cushions like hedgehogs who chose fashion. A woman with a voice like warm bread folds a string of tin hearts over your palm and explains which ward off envy and which merely catch light. You remember your scrip already hosts a small constellation of pewter, so you buy one modest pin shaped like a tiny bridge callback to your favorite architecture and promise your hat the promotion later. Stalls sort themselves by the grammar of need. Menders at one end, food and flasks near the middle, entertainment where the shade gathers, and coins lose their footing. You start with the menders. A leatherworker sizes your turn shoes at a glance, pokes the seam with a bone fid, and approves your lacing pattern as if you'd passed the exam without attending the lecture. He offers a strap for your scrip, not free, but the prayer that goes with it is, he says, and sells you a thimble of beeswax for thread your favourite balm's cousin. Quirky tidbit. Some storekeepers press their names or little beasts into plugs of wax, a one-finger brand. You take hen and cross, because your cloak cord could stand to remember both farm and chapel. Food stalls hum like small parables. A girl blows on a skillet and flips a kind of pancake with herbs and ambition. The edges crisp as righteous arguments. You buy one and watch it disappear with your best manners. A toothless man offers dried pears, each a wrinkled sermon on sweetness. You tuck two into the scrip fruit as just a portable hymn, and decline the candied pilgrim almonds dyed a suspiciously enthusiastic blue. Joke 1. You imagine the almonds glow at night, and decide you already own a lantern. The entertainment quarter announces itself by the way, feet slow without permission. A pair of jugglers stand on a plank across two barrels, mercy balanced between them. Their balls arc like tidy planets with better calendars than yours. Next to them, a small troop of minstrels unpacks lutes and a vielle. One sets a tabor, pattering under everything like a heartbeat that has learned syncopation. Their song begins in the key of persuasion. Friends of the road, hear the short way to St. Mercy's Ford. 12 bold strides, no tolls paid, blessings by the cord. The refrain promises the impossible with excellent scansion. Songs that sell shortcuts are an ancient sport, and your staff votes no before your ears have finished the verse. Still, you listen. Information hides inside tunes the way herbs hide inside pottage. Mainstream fact leans over your shoulder, tapping a measure. Itinerant performers, minstrels, jongleurs, gleemen, worked markets and roads, carrying news, satire, local notices, and sometimes a spice of propaganda. Guilds existed in some towns, and municipal records tell of licenses, fines, and fees. Their repertoires stitch together miracle tales, romances, and timely warnings. You catch a real fragment in the rhyme "Toll's a copper, Clark's a dove," which sounds exactly like the good-tempered woman who stamped your lead token at the bridge. The rest? Aspirational geography. Between verses, the troop's leader tips his hat at your shell and improvises a stanza about the pilgrim with a spoon who knows the rules of noon. Your spoon blushes in the scrip. You leave a coin because the rhyme was kind and because art is a toll you pay willingly. You do not follow his whispered invitation to skip the marsh by the alderwood. Your shoes have a veto, and your shoes remember your degree in puddle avoidance. Cons live where shade and curiosity meet. A man with sleeves too clean deals cards painted a little too well. He calls you friend 3 times in one breath and invites you to find the saint under the chalice. Another flips 3 cups over a pea with the modesty of a serpent. You let your staff lean against your leg and keep both hands in sight. Curiosity is fine, but hands will wander if you give them interesting errands. Only a farthing to guess, he chirps. Only a bellyful to lose, you think. Joke 2. You tell him you've taken vows of non-gambling on days ending in Y, and he laughs because a laugh can be a refund if you don't press it too hard. A different stall hawks maps a grand word for inked hints. The seller traces a path with his finger like a river that forgot to meander. Here, a monk's style. There, a friendly gait. This bend, shave it close, to save an hour. You ask about last week's flood, and whether the alder roots show yet. He blinks, heretics do less blinking. Historians still argue whether medieval travellers routinely relied on drawn maps for short stretches, or whether landmarks and word of mouth navigated most feet except in royal itineraries and maritime charts. Paper is costly, but memory is brave. You buy a scrap that shows distances between the next 3 hospices, and a note about lantern boys near the tanners, truth in ink, your favourite luxury. Music again, of a different kind. A blind singer with a rebec sits by the church wall, voice worn smooth by miles. His ballad tells of a bridge built by widows while the river pretended to be a dragon, and of a ferryman who kept a museum of flattened spoons. Hello, old friend. He passes a cap with a dignity that feels like liturgy. You leave a coin. He nods like a man who has checked your stamp and found it sufficient. Craft cons are kinder than cup cons. A stall sells Templar locks, handsome padlocks with promises. You admire them, then remember your scrip is safer tied to your belt than hooked to any iron a night boy can unhook. Another offers relic-scented water, and your ampulla twitches in protest. You ask which relic. He answers, the usual. You apply the priest's porch rule. If the usual has a price but no proper name or feast day, it's probably yesterday's well in a persuasive bottle. You buy instead a small cloth case for your document packet, a pocket within your pocket because bureaucracy likes nesting dolls. The fair hosts its public service announcements at a trestle posted with chalk. A guild sister writes, confraternity walk on Sunday, widows first, children in the middle, men at the ends. Below it, bridge toll adjusted while repairs continue. Pity the clerk. And, beware hooks at benches, mind your scripts. You mark the time for the escort, a free kindness with choreography, and smile at the clerk's anonymous plea. Your lead token earned its nap in your scrip. You are willing to endure one more stamp if the bridge demands it. By the ale casks, a group argues about a shortcut through Lord Alder's deer park. A mile saved, says one. A fine earned, says another. The tinker with one shoulder higher than the other advises the arithmetic of consequences. You'll walk the mile twice when the forester turns you. Historians still argue whether trespass through parks was winked at on major routes or treated always like audacity, payable in coin. Records show both leniency and zeal, often depending on the forester's day and the poacher's face. You keep the park on your mental map as scenery, not pavement. Enter the patterer, the human newspaper. He hawks broadsides illustrated with woodcuts. A pilgrim kneeling at a shrine, a miracle with generous beams of light, a wanted man with a nose like a gable. You can't afford the paper, but you afford the headline. 2 bridges out beyond St. Agatha, ferries standing by. A hospice taking in roof timbers tomorrow. Today's minstrels performing at sunset for alms to that same roof. You file the note behind your safe conduct and in front of your skepticism. A boy tries to ease your script strap off your shoulder with the gentleness of a cat stealing a warm spot. You feel the tug and put 2 fingers on the strap without looking. Not today, you murmur, and not with that knot. He freezes, startled by courtesy, then melts back into the crowd with a future that might or might not improve. You tighten the secondary cord you tied in Section 5's dorm like the good student you've become. Joke 3. You consider issuing script diplomas, certified difficult to steal, with a wax seal that sticks better than your will after 3 bowls of pottage. By noon, the fare exhales. You've bought thread wax, a pin, a document pocket, and a secret. The best information often rides inside songs and jokes, and the worst rides inside bargains thinner than a pilgrim's patience. Mainstream fact takes one more bow. Markets on saint and fair days were not only for goods, they were hubs for contracts, hires, and news witnessed, shouted, sung. Town records echo with stall fees, fines for games of chance, and permissions for honest minstrels to perform in daylight and politely go away by curfew. Your job, as always, is to hear the bell hiding inside the melody, the thing that keeps you safe when your feet feel generous. You leave the trestles with your scrip heavier by an ounce and lighter by a worry. The minstrels launch one last verse to chase you. Keep to the crown and share it round. Leave coins for bridges, not for swindles found. You hum it because it's annoyingly useful. The shells in the basket clack like gentle applause. Your own taps your chest, pleased with its new bridge-pin neighbour. When the road narrows, you let a woman with a child on her hip pass first. When the ditch threatens, you recall the alderwood, the deer park, and the ferryman's bell. When a man offers a miracle for a price, you remember the porch, the seal, the water that tasted of mint and honesty. If someone asks what the roadside market taught you, you'll say, buy the practical, tip the beautiful, pass the fraudulent, with a nod that leaves dignity intact. Listen for directions wrapped in rhyme. Keep your script where your hand can find it without drama, and never trust a shortcut that sings louder than your shoes. The road narrows to a thought, and then widens to a city that has practiced welcoming longer than you have practiced walking. Spires nose the sky, roofs knit themselves together like kind arguments, and somewhere bells rehearse a fanfare that will never quite admit it is for you. Your shell taps your chest as if to say, "Steady," and your staff, which has learned the grammar of stones, answers, "Here." You step over the last ridge and see what every muddy mile has been sketching in your mind. Gate, square, shrine tower, 3 notes of a song, so familiar it feels like memory. Etiquette goes ahead of you, knocking softly at each threshold. You pass a public fountain where water tumbles with the unembarrassed clarity of truth. Pilgrims rinse hands, faces, and the part of pride that tries to be special when all feet are equally dusty. You wash without theatre palms. Brow, the shell itself letting the water rewrite your day in legible script. Mainstream fact slips its arm through yours. Many shrine towns kept washing places, or streams used by travellers, before entering precincts. Santiago had the Lavacolla stream outside the city where tradition says pilgrims washed before the final approach, and Jerusalem and Rome had their own rituals of cleansing and prayer. Historians still argue whether the name Lavacolla means full-body baths, or simply wash the neck, and whether bathing there was a uniform medieval practice or a custom embroidered by later retellings. Either way, water treats your road grit with democratic grace. The gate watch looks you over with the weary kindness of professionals. Your town stamp earns a nod, your safe conduct a second, your face the third and most important permission. You walk into a square, hoisted up on stalls and voices. Somewhere a boy sells candles by weight, shaving curls off the base like cheese. Somewhere a woman mends a hem with a needle that moves like an argument you cannot refute. You buy 2 humble tapers and a wick of patience. Joke 1. The candle seller offers pilgrim length, or I have opinions about wax length, and you bravely choose piety-sized to keep your sleeves safe. At the shrine gate, you tuck your staff where other staffs lean, like old comrades sharing scandal and splinters. A volunteer gestures you toward the line that has learned how to breathe together. The nave is a ship the sea has decided to respect. The air tastes of beeswax and the faint, sweet dust of stone that has been sung to for centuries. You move with the tide, while the shell taps a metronome you now know by heart. Step, hush, step, hush. When your turn comes, you set the candles where their small bravery becomes a plural. You touch stone, as if stone could catch kindness from your palm. Custom gathers to you like a cloak. Some kneel, some bow, some kiss a rail. You follow your honest version. A hand on the cool column that remembers Mason's chatter. A murmur for those who walked with you only in your pocket. A quiet thanks for bridges, ferries, and watchmen who made night a negotiable, not a verdict. Quirky tidbit leans over from a side chapel. Wax ex votos, little models of hands, feet, hearts still hang in some places. A gallery of healed intentions. In a few towns you can spy a wax boat or a wax piglet, proof that mercy listens to very specific nouns. You offer the shrine your less photogenic request, good socks tomorrow for someone who isn't you, and decide specificity suits prayer as well as ex votos. A clerk near the transept offers a stamp for those collecting witnesses. She glances at your safe conduct, approves the wax like a connoisseur of cherries, and presses an emblem into a clean corner. She does not hand you a diploma. She does hand you a smile that behaves like paper with a perfect watermark. Historians still argue whether medieval pilgrims here commonly received formal certificates, or whether badges, witness, and perhaps a priest's notation were the norm. What you have is enough. A seal that remembers its kiss and a face that will remember yours. You climb a side stair because the queue flows there today, not to audition for sainthood by knees, but because stairs are where a rival makes its own weather. Someone behind you hums a line from a market ballad about bridges. Someone ahead whispers directions in a language you do not speak, and yet you understand exactly where to place your feet. Joke 2. You consider announcing that all puddles are forgiven from this height. Then remember, puddles require no absolution. They require better footwork. When it is time to go, not rushed, not shooed, simply gently return to gravity. You reclaim your staff from the small forest by the door. It feels heavier in the kind way gifts feel heavier. Same wood, more story. You step back into the square, where the world is already a practical animal again. The porter at the hospice just beyond the shrine yard reads your face, points to the basin, and sets a bowl of pottage near your future palate without demanding your curriculum vitae. Bless the species. Washing returns as liturgy. Hands, face, the sweet domestic ablution of wiping sweat from the leather of your shoes, the respectful dab at your script's flap to remove the market's fingerprints. You do not wash away the road. You wash until the road, and you agree on a truce. Clean enough to share a room, dirty enough to remember who paid. You hang your cloak with the patience you learned in Section 5 straw ballet, tuck your boots toe to heel, and tie the lace to your wrist, because habits are how you thank your former self for not being foolish. Supper is familiar, which is the best possible compliment. One spoon, one trencher, one small joke from a cook who knows the difference between salt and sermons. You pass the ale left, you bless the blade before cheese, you let the pottage be honest without pressuring it into excellence. Mainstream fact bows once more. So many hospices, confraternities, and lay kitchens kept these simple rules running, that whole roots functioned like one long, slow household. The paperwork and the piety mattered, but the ladles and basins did the daily saving. You eat with gratitude shaped like a small, steady nod. Thanks are a chore you enjoy. You find the bridge box and feed it a coin, because bridges keep making good decisions while you sleep. You ask a clerk where to leave an alms for the outgate poor. She points you to a shelf under a painted saint who smiles like a woman who has cut many stubborn threads. You touch the shell to the cool edge of the shrine door as you pass, and feel how polite stone can be when your hand is not in a hurry. Joke 3. You award the city 5 stars. Excellent bells, water with strong character, minimal lantern boy interference, and decline to engrave it on the lintel. Departure performs itself in whispers. You wake at the honest grey, lace with the one-pull knot, and fold your blanket with the tidy pride of a person who has learned to leave rooms kinder than you found them. The porter drowses like a saint who chose the night shift. You set a coin where the ledger will find it, and not a mouse. Outside, the square holds its breath. Bakers explain dawn to flower. Swifts scribble morning notes above roofs. And your staff, newly ambitious, writes a neat "again" on the cobbles. You step lightly so as not to wake the world you love. Your shell taps. Forward. Your scrip answers. Ready. The road remembers your weight and offers it back in kind. If anyone asks about arrival, you'll say it felt like washing with your feet. If they ask about leaving, you'll say the same. The etiquette you packed on the first muddy night: share the crown, spare the splash, ask for the seal, thank the water, trust the bell still fits. You wear it out the gate as the town rubs its eyes and forgives you for being the sort who arrives only to depart. You forgive yourself too, because roads exist to be used and shrines to remind you why. Now let it all soften. Let the road drift to the edges of your mind, like a map left in sunlight, colours fading to kind pastels. The square is quiet. The gate is only a hinge in a dream. The shell rests against your chest as lightly as a coin on still water. Breathe in the faint sweetness of beeswax and bread cooling on a silent bench. Breathe out the long day, the ferryman's bell, the calm clerk's seal, the porter's gentle, "There we are." Everything becomes slower, rounder, easier to hold. The basins are full, clear, and undemanding. You wash your hands again, in memory if not in water, and feel travel slip from your fingers like dust that finally agreed to fall. Somewhere a bridge hums to itself, cutwaters purring in an even rhythm. Somewhere a dorm room settles, straw learning your shape and keeping it just long enough to make sleep brave. The rules you carried: no splashing, one spoon, lights at the bell stretch into wider comforts, no urgency, one breath, the soft closing of a door that will open kindly tomorrow. Let the faces blur to warmth. The widow with the tidy veil, the tinsmiths keeping pace at the hedge, the watchman whose lantern knew when to be small. Let their footsteps sync with yours until the whole procession becomes a single, quiet heartbeat. You did enough today. The road does not require anything more from you than rest. It will be here when you wake. It has been here longer than bells, longer than maps, long enough to know how to wait. The lantern lowers behind its hornpanes. The staff slides under the pallet where your reaching hand will find it without looking. The shell becomes a gentle weight, an old star that does not need to shine to be true. The last sound is your own breath, even and easy, making more room inside your chest than you remembered you had. As the world dims, think of cool stone and clean water, and a bell that speaks only once, softly, to say, "Sleep."